6, 2023 meeting of the Tahoe Truckee Sanitation Agency to order. And if you could maybe start out with a roll call, Kaylee.
All right. President Dan Wilkins.
I'm here.
Vice President Blake Tresson.
Here.
Director Dale Cox.
Yes.
Director David Smelser.
Yes, here.
Director Scott Wilson.
Here.
All present and accounted for.
All here. All right, thanks. And if everyone could join me for the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, thank you. All right, first item on our agenda is public comment. So this is an opportunity for any member of the public to offer any comments to the board on any items not on the agenda, and you have up to 5 minutes.
Hi, I'm David Diamond. I was here a few months ago and talked to you and congratulated you on the processing switch from your chlorine processing to the bleach light processing. And at the time, I only understood that it was a pilot program, and I didn't realize that you'd actually started doing this and that you were monitoring it to make sure that it worked. But I just found that out recently, and I just wanted to say, again, thank you. This is huge, and I know that the community doesn't fully understand what you've done here, but that switch in processing is super important. So congratulations to everybody who made it happen, and thanks to everybody who permitted it to happen.
Yeah, thanks, Dave. Yeah, that was
Recording
really...
in progress.
Do you want to do that again?
Yeah, might have to do that, yeah.
Do you want me to do that again? No. Oops.
Thanks. Is there any other public comment for any items not on the agenda? John?
My name is Jan Holman, Truckee resident, and I want to apologize that this item is actually on the agenda, but I don't have the flexibility to stay until the river revitalization strategy is discussed and whatnot. So I just wanted to first thank the board for seriously entertaining the prospect of surplus land being used for industrial uses. Specifically for receiver sites from West River Street, West and East River Street. And I just want to also, as a bit of background, I was served as chair of the General Plan Advisory Committee, and I think as all of you know, one of the things that we identified early on in that process through our consultants is that the town as a whole and the region as a whole, not just town of Truckee, the region as a whole has a serious shortage of light industrial commercial property that can be used for a variety of things like metal shops and whatnot. So even if it's a complicated process, as we all know, moving existing businesses off of the river, I think I'm optimistic that it can be done. We've seen it happen in the past, specifically with transfers from West River Street to Pioneer Center. That is a complicated process, but regardless of that complex process, there's definitely an extreme shortage of light industrial use, light industrial properties, and wanted to really thank this board for once again looking at the broader public good. And I just wanted to, last comment I'll just say, as I rode my bike here from Glenshire on this beautiful legacy trail, that would not be in existence if it wasn't for this board. So thank you so much.
Thanks, Sean. Any other comments for items not on the agenda? All right. Seeing none, let's move on.
Acknowledge the...
Yeah, that's related to our consent agenda, right?
This was public comment that was emailed in?
Yeah, I think it was relative to one of the items on the consent calendar.
Yes.
So I was going to mention it as part
Okay,
of that.
thanks.
Yep, thank you. All right, next on our agenda is professional achievements awards and anniversaries.
Morning, Board of Directors. One second, please. I'll take this for Vicki today since she's not here. Morning, Board of Directors, President Wilkins. We have two professional achievements and anniversaries that we'd like to bring forward today. One of them is the acknowledgement of Joel Oberly, operator here at TTSA. He's taken and received his Operator 3 certification. And the other is a 5-year anniversary for Scott Fleming. Scott's not here today, so we're going to ask him to come back next month so he can be to get in front of the board and say, hey, you guys can congratulate him. But we just want to bring those two up today.
Great. Thanks, Mike. Any questions? Any public comment? Seeing none. Okay, next is our consent calendar. We've got 3 items on consent. One is minutes from our May 17th board meeting. One is approval of the payment of general fund warrants, and a third is approval of the financial statements. As Blake mentioned, we did receive a email public comment requesting from a member of the public who's not here at the meeting, not able to attend, requesting that we pull the financial statements for discussion, not of anything in particular. So I don't have a need to pull the financial statements, but if any of the other board members wish to, I know they've been thoroughly reviewed by our finance committee, which is Scott Wilson and Blake Trezin. So I don't know if anyone wants to pull that item for further discussion.
It's up to the finance committee.
I'm okay with pulling the financial statements. I think it's a good thing to just briefly go over those.
Okay.
I see no need to pull the general fund warrants, though, or the. And I did have a comment on the board meeting minutes.
Okay, so you want to pull those?
Yeah, couple small items.
Okay, so you want to pull items 1 and 3?
Sure.
Does any member of the public wish to pull any items from consent? Seeing none, would anyone like to make a motion to approve the payment of the general fund warrants?
Also move.
Moved by Director
Second.
Trezin, seconded by Director Cox. Is there any public comment on that? Seeing none, those in favor signify by saying aye.
Oh, we got
sorry.
to interrupt
We have-
because Director
we have to do
Smelser-
roll call?
Yes.
If you could do roll call, Kaylee?
Say their names first. Okay. So, sorry. Director Cox,
Yes.
President Wilkins,
Yes.
Director Trezin,
Yes.
Director Wilson,
Yes.
Director Smelser. I'm sorry.
Yes.
Okay. All in favor?
Great.
So moved.
Carries unanimously. Blake, in the minutes.
The minutes I just saw, there were a couple items, 3 and 4 from the last board meeting regarding the adoption of the sewer rates and the cost of living adjustment, where the motion, I think they copy and pasted something that says approve the consent agenda as opposed to the item. Those weren't consent. I don't believe those were consent
No.
items. And so if we could just amend items 3 and 4 of the minutes to accurately reflect the motion that was made, that'd be great.
Okay. Any further discussion? Any public comment on minutes? Seeing none, would anyone like to make a motion to approve the minutes as amended?
Also move.
Second. Motion by Director Trezin, second by Director Wilson. If there's no further discussion, Kaylee, if you could do roll call?
Director Cox,
Yes.
President Wilkins,
Yes.
Director Trezin,
Yes.
Director Wilson,
Yes.
Director Smelser.
Yes.
All in favor? So moved.
All right. Motion carries unanimously. Next is the financial statements.
Great. So yeah, the Finance Committee does meet with staff to go over these items, and it's good to look at our fund balances and all that, and not recommending any changes, but just I think highlighting. And Crystal, I know this was on consent, so you maybe have a presentation, but perhaps not. But just the one item, it looks like noteworthy item was just on the general fund for the month on the combined cash statement. It looked like our amount of change, that Fund 10 went up by $4.8 million, which I believe was just a teeter payment, our portion of the property taxes, along with on the teeter payment schedule, we also receive our user fees from those that we bill on the tax roll. And so there's just a little bit of a difference because I believe on the Fund 10 cash report, those are recorded slightly differently. They're kind of allocated monthly as opposed to on a cash basis. And so I just pointing that out for the board if you notice the discrepancy there in the cash statement. That was really it.
Okay.
Yeah.
And that's all accurate.
Yeah. Okay. I was just confirming with you. Yeah.
Great. Yeah, thanks for that additional detail, Blake. Is there any further discussion by the board on the financial statements? Seeing none, is there any public comment on the financial statements? Seeing none, would someone like to make
Move
the
to
motion?
approve.
Motion by Director Cox to approve the financial statements. Is there a second?
A second.
Second by Director Trezin. There's no further discussion. Kaylee, if you could do roll call.
President Wilkins,
Yes.
Vice President Tresson,
Yes.
Director Cox,
Yes.
Director Smelser,
Yes.
Director Wilson,
Yes.
all in favor? So moved.
Motion carries unanimously. Okay, next. Our regular agenda, item 5.1, public hearing for public comment related to the board's consideration of adopting a resolution of the board adopting 2023-2024 tax roll billing and approval of billing and collection of charges on the county tax roll. You have this one, Crystal?
We just have to do this every year when we take everything to the tax to the counties for the tax roll. This is the hearing, and management and staff recommend the board of directors hear public comment and consider whether there's a majority protest.
So let's go ahead and open the public hearing. See if there's any comment on this item. Is there any comment on this item? Seeing none, we'll go ahead and close the public hearing on this item. And I don't believe there's any action required for this item. We were just, the issue is just to hold the public hearing, correct, Andrew?
I believe that's correct.
Okay.
The actions are involved.
Okay.
In each individual county.
All right, so let the record reflect that we held the public hearing related to this item, and we will move on. Next item is approval of resolution 2-2023, adopting the 2023-2024 tax roll billing report for the County of Placer tax roll.
I'll take this one.
Okay.
We are sending the billing for the 2023-2024 tax roll to Placer County in the total amount of $6,896,774.27. The fee for doing this to have everything billed, this amount billed for the tax roll is $68,967. Management and then attached a billing. There is attached a billing report for that county. Management staff recommend approval of Resolution 2-2023, adopting the 2023-2024 tax roll billing report and approving billing and collection of charges in the County of Placer tax roll.
Thank you. Is there any board discussion on this item? Seeing none, is there any public comment on this item? Seeing none, would anyone like to make a motion?
Move to approve.
Motion by Director Cox to approve Resolution 2-23.
Second.
Second by Director Wilson. There's no further discussion. Those, please do the roll call, Kaylee.
President Wilkins,
Yes.
Vice President Tresson,
Yes.
Director Cox,
Yes.
Director Smelser,
Yes.
Director Wilson,
Yes.
all in favor?
Motion carries unanimously. Next item is item 3, which is approval of Resolution 3-2023, adopting the 2023-2024 tax roll billing report for El Dorado County, and also requesting El Dorado County put the wastewater treatment plant billing on the tax rolls.
For El Dorado County, the agency sewer service revenue charge is in the amount of $772,000, or $772,490.43, and the total fee for that we will pay to El Dorado is $1,482. Management and staff. There are 3 attachments. El Dorado has levy forms that we also have to attach with our tax bill billing. Management and staff recommend approval of Resolution 3-2023, adopting 2023-2024 tax roll billing report and approving billing and collection of charges in the County of El Dorado tax roll.
Thanks, Crystal. Any questions or comments from the board? Seeing none, is there any public comment on this item? Seeing none, would anyone like to make a motion?
Move to approve.
Motion by Director Cox,
I'll second.
second by Director Wilson to approve Resolution 4-2023. Roll call, please.
President Wilkins,
Yes.
Vice President Tresson,
Yes.
Director Cox,
Yes.
Director Smelser,
Yes.
Director Wilson,
Yes.
all in favor?
Motion carries unanimously. Thank you. And then, let's see, next one is Resolution 4-2023, conducting the same actions as we just did for the other counties for Nevada County.
Yes, that's correct. And for Nevada County, the total sewer service charge revenue is $5,779,714.71, and the fee is $5,779. Management and staff recommend approval of Resolution 4-2023, adopting the 2023-2024 tax roll billing report and approving billing and collection of charges on the County of Nevada tax roll.
Thanks, Crystal. Any questions from the board? Seeing none, any public comment? Seeing none, would anyone like to make a motion?
Move to approve.
Motion by Director Cox, seconded by Director Wilson. Thank you very much.
Sorry, Blake, I don't mean to take all the oxygen out of you here.
It's great having you here, Dale. Okay, got a motion by Director Cox, second by Director Wilson. Kaylee, roll call, please.
President Wilkins,
Yes.
Vice President Tresson,
Yes.
Director Cox,
Yes.
Director Smelser,
Yes.
Director Wilson,
Yes.
all in favor?
Motion carries unanimously. Okay, next on the agenda is presentation and approval of the annual budget for fiscal year 23-24. Crystal.
I'll take this one. Director Smelter, can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can.
So I have a presentation, and you guys saw a draft of it last month with budgetary highlights. I'm just going to walk through the presentation and then open it up for questions. So go ahead to the next slide, Katie, please. So we're going to walk through the revenues, expenditures, CIP projects, talk through the projected year-end fund balances, and then I have a summary for everybody. Next slide. So this, I'll just briefly talk about this one. This is all agency revenue for all funds. We are projecting to come in at $20.6 million, and we are projecting for fiscal 24 budget of $24.1 million. And the $20.6 million is based off of the numbers year to date through May, not counting any June numbers or any year-end accruals that we would need to make. Next slide. So in the details on Fund 10, we are projected actuals are total $18.8 million. Of that, 13.6 is the sewer service charges, 3.4% increase over prior year or over the budget. Ad valorem is based off of the amounts we just got in May, and a little bit of adding some extra for June of $4.9 million. The fund interest, LAIF/banks, this includes all LAIF interest and all bank interest. We have not received any interest at this time from the CDs or the U.S. Treasury bonds, just as a note for the board and public. Other revenue is $71,000 and temp discharge is $25,000. For the projected budget, we did the sewer service charge is based off of the actual billings for the annual tax roll and 6 months of and 12 months of the direct bill amount in the amount of $17 million. Let's see. The ad valorem, the assumption we made was a 3% increase over prior year, so over the fiscal 23 projected actuals. The $254,000 of fund interest includes an amount for U.S. Treasury bonds of $125,000, and then some interest. We won't have interest yet on the CDs. We'll have a little bit. The other revenue is just consistent. We just did a slight increase over prior year, and every year we budget the temp discharges at $25,000. Are there any questions on this slide? On the Fund 10 revenue? Okay. Next slide. The wastewater capital reserve fund. This is our restricted funds, sewer connection fees, and fund interest. We are projecting fiscal 23 projected actuals to be $1.2 million, which is only 57% of the fiscal 23 budget. Possible reasons are reduction in construction because of the weather, or just maybe a reduction in construction in general. And then the fund interest includes the fund interest from LAIF and the bank accounts. And as everyone knows, we've had higher fund interest this year. For the projected, or for the FY24 budget, I look back for 3 years of increases of EDUs and the assumption I made. So 3 years ago it was a 1% increase year over year. 2 years it was a 0.5%, and then the prior year was a 0.08%. I went middle range. I took current amount of EDUs, which is 42,828. Took a 0.5% increase over that to get possibly an additional 214 EDUs, and then just multiply that by 5,000 to get 1,070,700, and I rounded it to 1,071,000. And then the fund interest is just it includes the CD interest and the projected LAIF interest. Questions? Fund 6 and 7 is just LAIF interest. Does not have any interest for the CDs. I did not account for any interest from the U.S. Treasuries to be divvied out between Fund 6 and 7. It is possible that will happen. And I just did an increase, a decrease, and took about 86% of projected actuals. Any questions on that? Okay, next slide. I think 2 more. Sorry, I didn't tell you. There we go. So we're going to go over the general fund expenditures overall. So fiscal 23, we're looking at finishing total expenditures before UAL of $15.4 million. The UAL is $1.2 million, and a total projected actuals with UAL is $16.6 million. For the projected FY23 projected actuals, for salaries and wages being a little bit or 6% higher than what we projected. That includes a partial year of two general manager wages and the benefits that go with that. The reason why the employee benefits are so low is because we have received a $450,000 reimbursement from retiree insurance, which accounts for a good majority of the benefits being low. Then we had, let's see what else did I put down here, most employee benefits. Those are the main items I have of note for fiscal '23 projected actuals. Are there any questions on that? From anybody?
Any questions? No. Don't see any.
Okay. So for projected, for FY24 budget, we're looking at 17.6 million before UAL and 1.1 million with unfunded, CalPERS unfunded accrued liability, total of 18.7 million. Assumptions, some of the assumptions that were made is that the fiscal 24 budgets for salaries, wages, and benefits do include projecting all of the salaries and wages for each employee to be at the max step. And then, of course, the general estimate of some overtime and the what is it called? What the year-end thing that the employees get that are fully maxed. Not the payout, but the percentage that they get when they're fully maxed out. The
Non-base pay.
Thank you. I always forget the name of that. I should write that down. The other thing is it also includes a 4.8% in COLA. And the last item that the salaries, wages, and benefits does include is 6 months salaries and wages for potential two new FTEs, one in IT and one in admin and finance. They will have to be brought before the board to be approved, but we went ahead and budgeted for 6 months worth. The other thing in the benefits section is we did not put into the budget put any reimbursement for premiums for retirees for OPEB, not OPEB, any health insurance reimbursements for retirees. We did not account for that. I do have that calculation. I did not have it at the time we did the budget, and we will be presenting the recommendation at the next Finance Committee meeting and then at the July board meeting for that. And my initial recommendation is going to be $350,000 on that. That is not accounted for in the budget. There are also in the health employee benefits, there are increases in PEPRA and classic retirement health insurance and retiree health insurance. I have a breakdown further later in the presentation for that. Professional services.
Crystal,
Yes.
when you made your projection for increase in health insurance costs for calendar year 24, do you remember what assumption you made?
I think it was a 9%. Yeah, the health insurance was a 9% increase for 6 months.
I saw some preliminary information come out of the CalPERS and the program. I think whether you're in PERS Gold or PERS Platinum, it's looking like it's closer to 20% for increase for the calendar year 24. So good comment.
I do have detailed breakdowns in the next couple of slides for some of the other expense categories. So if there aren't any questions on this slide in particular, we'll go ahead and go to the next slide, please. There we go. So this is I broke down the 4 high, in the next 4 slides, I broke down the 4 high-level expenditures that we'll be having for general fund expenses. This is a breakdown of the employee benefits. As you can see, in the projected actuals the $450,000 credit that would net against the retiree health insurance. I did not do that for fiscal 24.
Crystal, what is the source of that credit?
So we can request reimbursement based off of if we're fully funded. And so we can request reimbursement for premiums that we have paid.
So, Dan, if you remember, we put money into a trust fund, the
Yeah.
CERT, and so we have roughly $12 million sitting there. And this was the first time that we had elected to, because the market had returned well, we were fully funded to actually take a distribution from that trust fund to offset some of our retiree health costs. Yeah, as Crystal said, it's not budgeted, but you're thinking that we may be looking at a similar 350 or something like that. We'll see
Yeah.
what the market.
And we'll give the same presentation to the Finance Committee first. I actually wasn't expecting to be able to recommend one at all, but it looks like I can recommend one, and then whatever you guys decide in the Finance Committee will bring to the full board to approve.
Yep.
Because we have to request that reimbursement in July.
Okay.
So. Are there any other questions on this slide? A quick couple things to know. Pepper retirement went up from 7.65 to 7.91. Classic retirement went up to 14.35 to 15.85. And then there's a 5.4% increase in the retiree health insurance that we budgeted for, and the 9%, not 20% on the health insurance. Any questions on this slide? Next slide. So the next item that I broke out was the contractual services, which is a total of projected actuals 2.4 million and budgeted 2.7 million. Within these, we broke down the chemicals. The miscellaneous chemicals section is just the remaining smaller amounts all added together. So the methanol, the sodium hypochlorite, hydrated lime, liquid O2, and sludge disposable chemical polymer. Those are the high dollar chemicals, and we're looking at an increase there year over our budget to actuals. And then facilities maintenance, $279,000, and the rest of it's just some smaller items so that you can see the differences there. We did budget for other contractual services in 23 that we did not use, and I do not know what that was.
Crystal, I have a question. When I reviewed this yesterday for the second time, where was the chlorine that we purchased in 2023?
I actually have to look at the details for that, and I apologize. Are you able to see that, right?
I think we had budgeted $88,000 for the 22-23 fiscal year.
Okay.
Is that what you're asking?
Yeah,
We
I'm
actually
just
had
curious
budgeted
what the
for
actual
for
was.
the gaseous chlorine, or for the liquid chlorine, or for the sodium hypochlorite that we actually have used.
The previous.
So the gaseous chlorine, I believe, I don't know if you remember, I think it was $88,000 is what we had budgeted for the fiscal year 22-23.
Yeah, I'm just wondering why that wasn't on the slide.
If you give me a minute, I can look up the detail and I can tell you where it's
Okay.
at. Because Greg has the detail pulled up for me.
And I think if you look at the line item called miscellaneous chemicals,
It might
the
be.
budget was 380,000. The actual was only 212. So I'm
So
guessing that
it's
some of that savings in gaseous chlorine costs are recognized
Okay.
in that line item, but offset by not budgeting for
The sodium.
the bleach and
That's the-
having to spend $100,000+ on bleach.
It is part of the miscellaneous chemicals,
Okay.
and the budget was $95,000.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks.
I couldn't get it up on my own. Any other questions on the contractual services? Next slide. This is, I think, very self-explanatory. Utility costs are going up. So we projected 1.3 million, and we're projecting a budget of 1.4 million. The biggest part of that being in electricity. Any questions there? Next slide. And then the supplies, repairs, and maintenance breakdown. The So the warehouse stock is the largest. The warehouse stock is everything that's in our warehouse, and it's a bunch of parts and supplies. And this, we just rebudget every year to have that there in case we need to replenish it. I believe the last time I presented it was significantly higher. So are there questions on the supplies, repairs, and maintenance category?
No.
Next slide, please. Thanks, Katie. So we've talked about the capital expenditures extensively over the past year for Fund 2 and Fund 6. Fund 2 is our restricted funds. Fund 6 is our unrestricted funds. This is a 5-year projection for Fund 2 restricted. And you'll see I sorted it highest to lowest by fiscal 24 of what we're looking at for capital expenditures in Fund 2, which is a total of $1.1 million, and then the debt payment for the wastewater revenue bond is $2.2 million, being a total of $3.3 million in fiscal 24. Any questions on that? Next slide. And this is our unrestricted funds, rehab, replacement, and rehabilitation. And I did the same thing. The big items in fiscal 24 is $1.3 million in building roof replacement, $1.3 million in the front entry landscape improvements project. Then we've got digestion improvement, lime system, and a couple of other ones as you go down. Total of $6.6 million with a debt payment of $800,000 and a total of $7.4 million for unrestricted funds. Any questions? Okay, this is the one that's, I will walk through this as slowly or as clearly as I can. So what this slide represents is a projected FY24 year-end fund and it shows the target balances. So we'll walk through Fund 10 first. Fund 10 target balance needs to be 6 months worth of the fiscal 24 projected budget, so that it can cover the first 6 months of the year before it gets its first teeter payment. The fiscal 24 estimated beginning fund balance using the cash at 5/31/23 and estimating for June activity, we are projecting that to be $9,996,000 at basically end of this year, beginning of next year. We need to transfer to reach our target balance of, the first line is our target balance, which is 6 months of the fiscal 24 expenditures, and that's $11,694,000. So we are short $1,698,000 to start our year off. We are transferring part of that money from Fund 6 and part of that money from Fund 7. Those actual transfer requests will come to the board in July when we have an ending cash balance to approve. And then I'm gonna if you go through on the line fiscal 24, the second line, estimated actuals beginning fund balance. That's the estimated actual beginning fund balance for each of the rest of the funds. Now let's go down to the second part. Looking at Fund 10, now that we have transferred money, our adjusted beginning fund balance is going to be $11.7 million. Budgeted revenues is 22.5. Budgeted expenses is 17.6, and then the CalPERS is 1.1, giving us a projected ending fund balance of $15,423,000 for Fund 10. We will need to make transfers. I'll explain those when I go through the other funds sometime in the middle of the year back to Fund 6. Sometime out in January, most likely. The target fund, and then, so the projected ending fund balance for fiscal 24 in the general fund is $11,423,000. The number below is just the target balance restated. Is there any questions on that explanation? Okay, so coming over to the wastewater capital reserve fund, these are our restricted funds. We're projecting to start with 19.9 million, with a budgeted revenue of 1.5 million, budgeted expenditures of 3.3 million, projected ending fund balance is 18.1 million. Now, when you go down to the fund target balance for Fund 2 is 50% of the 5 years of projects. And for Fund 2, the 5-year project total was 25.9 million in the next 5 years out of Fund 2. So half of that is 12,951,400, which means we are over target balance of 5.2 million with those projected projects for the next 5 years. Questions on that for restricted funds? Okay, so let's go to the RRU fund. Projected beginning actuals, adjusted beginning actual balance is 3,458,000. That's after we take out the 1,617,000 and transfer that to Fund 10. Budgeted revenues 100,000. Budgeted expenditures 7.3 million. We will have a projected ending fund balance of 3.8 million, which is where we're going to need to transfer money back from Fund 10 to Fund 6 and some money from Fund 7 to Fund 6 to cover that deficit so that we have a positive projected ending fund balance for our RRU. And then the target balance for RRU is the same, 50% of the next 5 years of projects. And we're looking at, including debt, 63.7 million in the next 5 years for RRU. Any questions on that? And the emergency fund, we earn interest on that throughout the year, and then we'll bring that to 4 million at the beginning of the year. That gives us the total. We are a projected beginning fund balance of 39 million, budgeted revenues 24 million, budget expenditures 28 million, UAL 1 million, projected ending fund balance 33.8 million. Projected target fund balance for fiscal 24 should be 60.5 million, and we are a deficit of 26.7 million, taking into consideration target fund balances. Any questions? In fact, you have a question.
I'm going to save them.
Okay.
Keep going.
Last slide. I don't know why I took my glasses off. Okay, so I'm just gonna. I just put some bullet summary points here. The annual budget provides detailed operating and capital improvement plans for the agency to meet the wastewater discharge requirements to provide a high level of service to its customers. The agency hired HDR Engineering to perform a sewer rate fee study. As a result of the study, the agency followed the Proposition 218 process and is implementing increased sewer rate fees for fiscal 24 through 28. In addition, the agency hired HDR Engineering to perform a sewer connection fee study, which will be completed in fiscal 24. The agency has sufficient funds to operate and perform necessary capital improvements for fiscal 23-24. The target reserve balance for replacement, rehab, and upgrade fund is low, and the target balance is a negative 31.6 million. And the agency has made strides in bringing reserves up to the appropriate target balance. Next steps needed are to research and initiate potential future debt funding. That concludes the presentation. Questions?
Questions by the board? Blake, looks like you had a...
I guess just some comments. I mean, the budgets, we've come a long way in our budget preparation. It really, it's a roadmap financially for us as to how we're doing, and it's got a lot of detail. It's really nice. We can see where all of our revenues are coming from, the assumptions we make, all our expenditure assumptions, the master plan we did on our capital side is really valuable to have. Obviously, we have we have very large capital expenditures that we're projecting to go through over the next 5 years. A lot of costs associated with that. Operating costs have gone up considerably, and we hadn't adjusted our rates for over a decade, and so hence the rate study. The map, looks good. It looks like we get from here to next end of June. But, just to acknowledge that, you especially look at that capital fund, we're going to spend $60 million, and it shows us ending the year with, $200,000 in the bank. And so it's not a totally bright map. There's, the rate increases we're going through are going to help that. We're going to be able to, cover our costs to operate the plant, but we obviously need to look at some financing to cover our capital needs. And so, we've still got some financial hurdles to deal with going forward. I think it's important for us to continue to look for opportunities to be prudent with these public funds. The budget, details are fairly high health insurance costs. We talked last year, made some adjustments to, I think, provide continued high quality insurance at a lower cost. I think, as those CalPERS rates come out this year, we talked about it last year, looking at that again, and a potential move from the Platinum plan to the Gold plan. Opportunities there for us to save money, possibly do some additional self-insurance to, keep the staff at a similar benefit level, but save the district some funds. High electricity costs. I know we looked at one point at potential for solar. I just look at $1 million a year in electricity costs, and are there opportunities for us to do that? Of course, there's capital costs associated with the project there, so it's challenging. But just leaning on staff and the board to look at this, with critical eyes and opportunities for us to find places to save money, but you can't do it without having the information. So I applaud you, Crystal, and all the staff for putting together such a good detailed budget that allows us to really see where our revenues coming from and our expenditures are, so we can make educated decisions going forward. A lot of financial challenges in the last year with the rate study, changing in our investment policies, and more challenges ahead looking at our connection fees, our potential debt financing, more opportunities with our reserves to bring in higher interest rates on that as well. And so but overall, just acknowledging those things. No recommended changes in the actual budget itself, though.
And Blake, I think you and Scott, as the Finance Committee, met with staff on a number of occasions as the budget was being prepared.
Yep.
Worked through a lot of the detail.
Yeah. And I would just like to dovetail on what Blake said. Crystal, you and your team, the entire staff, taking a look at these, the detail that you presented, makes it a lot easier for us to project out into the future and really make the fiscally responsible decisions that we need to going forward. The fact that you've got that information to us makes a huge difference for informed decisions. So thank you.
And just one other comment that we've talked to Crystal about and staff is, in looking for next year's budget to include a slightly longer fund forecasting methodology, so we can really, see where things are going and make sure that we're not headed in the wrong direction, that we've got our planning in place.
You look at it a 5-year look at it.
We do a 20-year at our agency, and I don't think it's any harder to do 20 than 5. I mean, the assumptions kind of compound on themselves. It's all a little bit of crystal ball stuff, but I think it's worthwhile to even look out further than 5 years. So something we'll play with, I think, as we go through the budget process next year, is a longer fund forecasting thing, and hopefully get a better idea of what, if any, major trends are looking our way and what we have to do to make sure we're ready for them.
And we've already initiated the roadmap for that. We've been working with Ken Diekler, I might have said his last name wrong, and we're working on for the August Finance Committee, because we need to start doing the pro forma projections so that we can look where we need to start getting debt funding. So we are already heading down that road of 10 or 25 or 20, depending on what we decide to do throughout the next year.
Dale, questions?
I just want to thank you, Crystal, for all your hard work. It was very clear and concise and well presented. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Dave?
I'm good, thanks.
Thanks. Yeah, I think really the biggest topic is the rate of capital project implementation as compared to needing to borrow money and the timing of that. So we're not currently needing to borrow money for capital projects, but what this picture is telling us is that we may need to very soon. And as a board, that's one of the bigger topics I think we'll need to deal with, is whether to implement the capital projects at the rate that we've currently forecast, or whether we slow that down so that there's less borrowing involved and more pay on a cash basis. Those are conversations for the future, but yeah. So, okay. Other questions from the board? Seeing none, is there any public comment on the budget? Seeing none, bring it back to the board. Would anyone like to make a motion to approve the FY 23-24 budget?
I so move.
Motion by Director Wilson.
Second.
Second by Director Trezin to approve the 23-24 budget. Kaylee, roll call.
President Wilkins?
Yes.
Vice President Tresson?
Yes.
Director Cox?
Yes.
Director Smelser?
Yes.
Director Wilson?
Yes.
All in favor?
Thanks. Motion carries unanimously. Next on the agenda is approval of resolution 5-2023 to revise the wastewater capital reserve fund budget and make related findings. Crystal.
I'll just stay up here. This resolution we do every year after we present the budget and the budget's been adopted, and it's just the resolution to it makes certain findings concerning purposes for which the wastewater capital reserve fund will be used and the relationship between such uses and the connection charges which are deposited into said fund. So if do you have questions?
Any questions by the board on this item?
No question.
No questions.
Any public comment on this item? Seeing none, would anyone care to make a motion to approve Resolution 5-2023?
So moved.
Motion by Director Cox, second by
I'll second.
Director Wilson. Thank you. If there is, did I take public comment on this? Is there any public comment on this? Seeing none. Roll call, please.
President Wilkins?
Yes.
Vice President Tresson?
Yes.
Director Cox?
Yes.
Director Smelser?
Yes.
Director Wilson?
Yes.
All in favor?
Motion carries unanimously. Next item is item 7, which is approval of Resolution 6-2023 establishing appropriation limits for fiscal year 23-24. Crystal.
So the government code requires the agency to calculate and establish appropriations limits for the agency property tax revenue and the proceeds of taxes. This is what Resolution 6-2023 is, and the appropriations limit for fiscal 2023-2024 based on allowable increases in per capita personal income and change in population is $4,162,838. We are given, to make this calculation, we're given information from each of the counties to make our calculation. Any questions?
Any questions from the board on this item? Seeing none. Any public comment on this item? Seeing none. Would anyone like to make a motion?
So moved.
Motion by Director Cox to approve Resolution 6-2023. Second by
Second.
Director Wilson. Thank you. If there's no further discussion, if you could take roll call, Kaylee.
President Wilkins?
Yes.
Vice President Tresson?
Yes.
Director Cox?
Yes.
Director Smelser?
Yes.
Director Wilson?
Yes.
All in favor?
Great. Next on our
I apologize,
agenda-
can I?
Thank you, Crystal.
Yeah.
I printed out the wrong agendas. So this is the updated agenda. Sorry about that. It's right on the website. I had printed out the old one. Does anybody need that updated? Does anybody else need updated? No?
All right.
Sorry, this
Thanks,
is
Mike.
that presentation.
So next on the agenda is item 8, the Truckee 2040 River Revitalization Presentation.
Good morning. Can you hear me okay? Okay. Director Smeltzer, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Perfect. Thanks for inviting me today. It's nice to be in front of the board. I think this is my first time in front of the board and first opportunity to meet Director Wilson and Director Cox. So thank you for that. This is just a quick overview of the Truckee 2040 General Plan that was unanimously. Oh, Kaylee, are you driving for me? Yeah, all I have is a PDF though. So I can scroll through. Okay, perfect. Thank you. Yeah, next, there we go. The Truckee 2040 General Plan was unanimously adopted by the Town Council on May 9th. This is after a 5-year-long process and community engagement process. It really serves as the blueprint for the town and where we're headed in the future. The general plan includes 7 updated elements. There's a land use element, community character, mobility, economic development, conservation and open space, safety and noise, our first climate action plan, and addresses kind of the vision for the future with a vision statement that was developed by our general plan advisory committee and proposed to council. Really the 2040 plan, if we take a step back and look at it, it addresses a lot of issues that were just not contemplated when the 2025 plan was developed. And the 2025 plan was developed in 2006. So there's been a lot of changes in our community and just in our society as a whole that the 2040 plan really tried to contemplate and consider in its development. And next slide. Just kind of an overview of what that 5-year planning process looked like. It started in 2018. Of course, it was a little bit interrupted with COVID. We had to shift course a little bit. But we had 37 agendized council meetings, over 60 public workshops, 19 general plan advisory committee meetings. There's 154 new policies, 175 new action items, a comprehensive mobility element. I'll speak to that a little bit more. That's one of the shifts in this 2040 plan, as well as many specific policies related to evacuation and fire preparedness. Next slide. The climate action plan, that's what we refer to as the CAP, and our mobility element. I mentioned this is the first climate action plan for the town, and this is really an element that's going to help steer us towards meeting the state mandated standards for GHG reductions and reducing our impact on the local environment. And then the mobility element that was previously referred to as the circulation element. In the 2025 plan, that was really focused on cars and moving people in cars. The mobility element is a broader look at that. We're talking and really looking at moving people, and whether that's through a personal vehicle, through our transit program, microtransit, e-bike sharing programs, and rideshare programs. So just a more holistic approach. And with the policies and the actions and our mobility element, even though it was in draft form at the time, this really helped the town be able to point to this document and secure about a $4.2 million grant from the state to help transition our fleet to our microtransit fleet to electric, install electric infrastructure in the new mobility hub and possibly out of the Coast. So that was a big win for the community, as those were steps we were going to have to take in the future for the state mandates anyways, and we got some significant funding to move that forward. Next slide. Thanks. The safety and noise element, this is where we really start to look at things that just weren't contemplated in the 2025 plan. And again, that was developed in 2006. We weren't as accustomed to mega fires back then and the wildfire preparedness, and really focused on that back in 2006. The 2025 plan had some pretty simple language in there about working with our partner agencies, which of course we want to continue to do, but the 2040 plan has really bolstered the language in the area of wildfire emergency preparedness. We're looking at fire-resistant landscaping, public awareness campaigns, fire-resistant vegetation standards. And then next slide, please. And then emergency response and preparedness evacuation modeling. We've been doing a lot of work in this area already, and aligned with the direction of the 2040 plan. We'll be installing license plate readers this summer, actually in the coming weeks, and couple that with some new AI software that we have that will do evacuation modeling by neighborhoods, so we can take the information from our license plate readers on how many cars are in a specific neighborhood, put that into our evacuation modeling software, and that will give us a good sense of how long it will take to model or to evacuate any specific neighborhood in town. So really in advancing these efforts to have better preparedness and response for the community. So what's next? The 2040 General Plan in Action. Next slide, please. This is taking a little bit of a step back, but it speaks to the General Plan in Action. Every year, the Council does a 2-day retreat, and every other year, they reestablish kind of the strategic priorities and direction for the town. The Council in January went through this process, and they reaffirmed the prior year's strategic priorities. And those include key infrastructure, and community connectivity, workforce housing, emergency preparedness, communication and public outreach, and environmental sustainability. Next slide, please. So we take those kind of broad topics and we develop a 2-year work plan. It's a very specific work plan with very specific action items on how we're going to advance those strategic focus areas for the town. In our proposed 2-year work plan that'll be heard by Council tomorrow night and hopefully approved, we have over 70 action items from the 2040 General Plan. Some of those action items are pretty easy and simple. Some of them will take many, many years to complete beyond the 2-year cycle, but they are included in that work plan. So we are ready to go and start working and implementing the actions and the policies in the newly adopted 2040 plan. The first of which will be development code updates. So there's a whole, probably about a year-long process of multiple presentations to council for consideration about aligning the development code with the new requirements in the 2040 general plan, specifically with land use and zoning. We'll be working with the Tahoe Forest Hospital District to complete their master plan. And then we are convening a river revitalization steering committee to discuss relocation of industry off of the river and a reimagined river corridor. And that's really what I'm going to focus on for the rest of this presentation. Next slide, please. So Truckee River revitalization. When this was presented to the council back in, I guess, May, we were really focused on West River Street, and the general plan is really a fairly small section of West River Street, partially due to the fact that we know we don't have an identified receiver site for that industry at this point. Next slide, thank you. But the council chose to expand this to the entire river corridor, so we're going to be looking at East and West River Street. And so we think it's important to kind of step back and say, where have we been as a community? And river revitalization has been a long-standing goal of the town. It was included in the first general plan. There was a downtown revitalization strategy that was completed. It was included in the 2025 general plan and again in the 2040 general plan. Next slide, please. Sorry, that's okay. So despite being included in multiple plans since incorporation, we think the time is really right now. We have the River Revitalization Steering Committee, R2SC is what we are lovingly referring to that as. We have a lot of redevelopment and revitalization happening in the downtown and the river corridor. And we really have heard from the community throughout the 2040 general plan process about wanting to really celebrate the river, protect the river, and enhance that whole river corridor for the community. We have significant capital investment happening along the river corridor as well as the downtown core, and is in the community interest in access to the river and protection and celebration of the river. Next slide, please. So just go over a little bit of what's happening down there. May have gotten delayed a bit in our West River Streetscape project. We're back to two-way traffic there now, so might still have small delays, but hopefully not as much. About $8.5 million of investment along the river corridor of West River Street, and that'll have sidewalks and enhanced pedestrian access and additional parking along the frontage down there. Reimagine Bridge Street, we'll be undertaking that in the next few years, about $7.5 million. You can see in some of these graphics, there'll be some traffic signals installed. That's not typical for us on both sides of the railroad tracks. And this is really also a pedestrian flow project to help connect the downtown core over to the river corridor, as well as movement along the railroad tracks and across the railroad tracks. Next slide. Our River Street Park, that'll begin next year as well, or at least anticipated another $7 to $7.5 million. Next slide, Kaylee. This is an interesting park design. It's a terraced park that will have viewing platforms, access down into the river to enjoy the river and interact with the river. Next slide. Just another viewpoint of this. On the left-hand side, you can see that there's a bridge that will connect the Legacy Trail over to the river. The park is envisioned to be flanked by two commercial buildings on the east and the west side. Next slide. And then the Legacy Trail, Phase 4 and 4B. 4A is under construction right now. That's where the bridge will connect over from the park over to Phase 4A. There's another bridge up at the Cottonwood connection that was installed a couple weeks ago. And then 4B is really a section of the Legacy Trail that's in Placer County. We are envisioning working with Placer County to move that forward so that we can have a complete Legacy Trail that'll go from Glenshire down to the lake. So we're excited about that project as well. So the vision statement that I referenced in the beginning of the presentation really speaks to access to the river and revitalization of the river by the phrasing connects, revitalize, and accessible Truckee River. So we have a number of elements and policies in the general plan that align with this direction. We have the West River District, and again, that's a fairly small district along West River Street, but the council has expanded the scope of our R2SC committee to include West River and East River. We're looking at forming the vision for that with this committee, but it's really a mixed-use, residential, commercial idea, at least at this point. There's at least 12 to 15 additional policies and action items that in some way speak to river revitalization, protection, and access within the 2040 general plan. And next slide. And then our council priority related to infrastructure, we have a goal dedicated to river revitalization. We have updated that to be river revitalization versus West River to reflect council direction. And part of that goal, next slide please, is to form the steering committee, which we've already started to do. We've also included a proposed capital budget. I'm sorry, it's a little bit hard to see. This will be considered and approved by council on Tuesday, tomorrow night as well. We plan to hire a planning firm to come in and help facilitate the committee discussion as well as really develop what the vision for the river corridor will be and the vision for the receiver sites so that we can have a really holistic, comprehensive discussion and look at what revitalization of the river means and what the receiver site locations could look like. We also plan to develop incentive programs with the River Revitalization Committee. We recognize that we're going to have some incentive programs in place to encourage relocation And we're really going to ask the committee members to lean into that conversation and help us develop those incentive programs. And then we have some money dedicated to acquisition of land as well. We do think it's important that the town take ownership of the land, or at least have that conversation so that we can really control that it does go for relocation purposes versus new industry. Next slide, please. So our R2SC steering committee. Next slide, please. We really have made a conscious effort to have this be a grown-up committee. We only have so many seats at the table for the committee membership, but we want to encourage the public and all interested parties to stay involved and come and give their feedback and help us develop some of these strategies moving forward. We have a pretty broad representation of viewpoints and interests on the committee, so it should be a pretty robust discussion going forward. Next slide, please. We have some different roles that we've identified at this point for the committee. We do envision this to be a multi-year committee with a lot of conversation. This is a big lift to have this conversation. So we're just really kicking it off now and expecting it to take a while. We need to identify potential receiver sites, develop the vision, as I mentioned, for both the river corridor and the receiver sites, and explore incentive programs. And then part of the river development of the vision for the receiver sites is understanding the property owners and the business owners. Just because they have maybe 4 acres of property right now, that doesn't necessarily mean that's what they want in a new site. They may want more, they may want less. So we need to engage in all of those conversations so we make sure we're planning accordingly. So that's why we plan to break up the committee into 2 subgroups. At our first meeting, we're going to have one subgroup help us really work with staff to identify business owners and property owners and start engaging in some of those conversations about what does relocation look like for them, what could it look like, what would they need for relocation in terms of land. And then the second subcommittee group will work with staff on issuing an RFP and hiring the planning consultant. So this is a really collaborative project from the start. Next slide, please. This is super small, so I'm glad I have a printout here because I can't read that far away. But we have, I mentioned, a number of different interests represented on the committee. We have 2 property owners, 2 business owners, representation of both the Chamber and the Downtown Merchants Association, 2 members at large, 3 potential receiver sites. We have coordination from the airport, as well as, sorry, I really can't see that far away. It's bigger on the screen. Oh, there we go. It's the airport, and we've submitted a request to TTSA, and then the TDPUD is also interested in serving on the committee as both a potential receiver site and then also as an agency that would like to relocate maybe down along property down here where the other government agencies are located. So they'll be a valuable participant. We have Mountain Area Preservation, and then the Contractors Association nominated Joan Jones to be representative of them, as well as the builder contractor community. Mayor Romack will be one of the council representatives, as will council members of our state. So we're excited about this list, and we would invite TTSA to join in that conversation as well if you're willing to do so. And next slide, just a quick thank you. We do have a great partnership with TTSA. We appreciate that. Enjoy working with your staff. And then outside of that, last slide. Questions on either the 2040 plan, the river corridor work that's going to be going on, or anything else?
Thanks. And for the record, that was Town Manager Jen Calloway that gave that presentation.
Should have done that in the beginning. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Jen. Questions or comments from board members? Maybe I'll jump in. I was going to bring this up on the next agenda item, but as you all know, I work for the town of Truckee, but I don't represent the town here. I represent the Dallas City Public Utility District. So I had contacted Andrew regarding whether or not I've got conflicts of interest.
Right on.
And I'm going to ask Andrew to jump into that.
Not only would it be for Dan, but I was just questioning whether or not Blake would have a conflict of interest being the general manager of Truckee Sanitation District.
No, I appreciate the question, and I always appreciate directors thinking ahead of conflict of interest issues and talking to me in advance. I've advised Director Wilkins, and I would do the same for Director Tresson, that at this point, I don't see a conflict of interest based on your employment or your representation of any member district on the board either. At this point, as we're going to discuss in the next item, we're really dealing with early stages of the agency thinking about potential disposition of surplus real property. We're very early in those discussions. So at this point, I don't see a conflict of interest. If the process were to proceed further based on the board's direction, we would give it some further thought depending on what point in the process we're in. We'll talk a little bit about what that process might look like. If we get to a point where the agency has identified potential transferees, if it's identified and a desire to move ahead, then we talk again about potentially having directors recuse themselves, potentially having Director Wilkins recuse himself if the town is identified as a potential transferee, so that he would not be acting on behalf of TTSA through that process. But we're not at that point yet, in my opinion.
Thanks, Andrew. So it sounds like one of the questions, Jen, is whether or not TTSA wants to participate on this committee.
Yeah, we would look for participation if there's interest in doing so.
Okay. So I guess questions or comments about the general plan process that Jen just gave us a report on.
I just want to thank Jen for reaching out. I know you came to TSD last week or the week before, and here to share that. I mean, it was a big lift, obviously, for the town to get through the general plan. I know it had been a long time in the works, and I really appreciate you reaching out and sharing it with the other agencies. And the river revitalization. I mean, there's a lot of elements to that, economic development and stuff like that. I mean, the river itself, obviously, we have a huge vested interest here in maintaining that as a protected source. We were just recently looking at some documents that we had when Glenshire was originally sewered, and we needed to bring a sewer line underneath the Truckee River just upstream from here. And there was a report on the town of Polaris. I don't know if you guys have heard of Polaris. It was kind of the ice-making capital, I think, of the western United States when the Transcontinental Railroad went through. And but refrigeration hadn't been invented, and you could still see the ponds right down here. But it kind of was a interesting time. It was the turn of the century, and basically they had to shut down Polaris ice making. One, because refrigeration was invented, but two, because all the ice harvesting that went on happened in the winter when there wasn't much flow in the river, and the flow that was in the river was actually pretty much the wastewater from Truckee and all the other towns upstream of that, and the ice was actually contaminated. The state sanitarian came up here and made a discovery of that, and they passed a law that said you couldn't produce this ice that they were using for refrigeration and other stuff that was that. And so it's nice to not live in that world anymore. And the river's obviously got great beneficial uses. And so, just the importance of TTSA and keeping that river clean is clear. The good question about our involvement as a receiver site. Obviously, the next item is all about our, exploring opportunities or what our options are regarding land use.
Right.
But yeah, again, thanks for offering and reaching out and sharing the plan with us.
Yeah.
Good history lesson, Blake.
Yeah.
You're right on. I don't want to be referred to as the old Oz Butterfield holdout, but my position here has always been, let's make this agency is safe for its employees and the environment and the community that surrounds us, and whatever it takes to make it safe is my utmost priority. And I don't take my marching orders from myself. I can meet and confer with my constituents at the Olympic Valley Public Service District in detail of anything that goes on here that has direct effect and importance to our constituents in Olympic Valley. And it's been made clear to me that our constituents feel the same way as I do, and that is the safety of the environment and the people that surround this agency. And so with that, if the Olympic Valley Public Service District Board gives me direction to minimize my stand on security and buffer and the security area around the plant, if they want me to change my philosophy, I will fold like a cheap suit. If they decide that they want to maintain the security and the buffer zone that was given to this agency in the 1972 California legislation commitment to the sanitation agency, there's a good chance that the Olympic Valley representative will be a pain in the rectal area. But I appreciate the presentation. But one thing that this is early stages of this presentation, and one of the things that I can see that's going to be very, very important is the member districts to be informed about what's going on. Okay? Now, for the directors at TTSA to convey what's going on here in a lot of cases is very difficult. And I think it would behoove you, as making this presentation, I think that the concept is absolutely outstanding and it's very well needed. But I think education to the member districts and their constituents at this stage of the game is vital. Okay, because the worst enemy that I can see coming down the pike is people not being informed. Okay. That's speaking for the Olympic Valley Public Service District and our constituents. Now, putting on my TTSA hat, what I'd like to see here is we've gone through the Carrillo report. We know exactly where we're headed in the next 10, 15 years with our expansion, with what we're going to need to do to process effluent for the future. The one thing we haven't done, and I think it's time for us to look at this, is a risk assessment of what this plant risk for the surrounding environment, and that would give us an idea of how close we can let development come to this plant without putting the security and the this agency at risk for if anything was to go wrong or if anything was to happen to put the agency at risk. I think it would be good for the directors to know and understand what kind of risk potential we serve right now with our new wastewater treatment procedures, getting away with chlorine, getting that out of our risk potential. The BNR, of course, with our effluent going into the river, we've polished that. I think it's time at this stage of the game to take a look at where and how close can we allow development to this plant without putting the community of Truckee and the surrounding areas at risk and keeping the liability of the agency to zero. So, I've given this a lot of thought. I've had a lot of heartburn over it because of the stand that we've always had in the past, And I'm the old man here. I went through the Oz Butterfield Doctrine, and I know, what kind of situation that we went through. When I first met Dan, I went through a year of the Legacy Trail and why the agency should allow the Legacy Trail to come through our property. We all reached a consensus. We put a cyclone fence all the way around, enhanced our security cameras, and it was a win-win for everybody. And there's no reason why this can be a win-win for everybody as well. However, we have to make sure that we educate our constituents. That's all of our member districts. And you would play a very important role in this, coming and explaining what the plans are with the town of Truckee, and to be able to sit back and inform the public of the direction, because there's a good potential, there's a good possibility that this could be met with a lot of opposition if people aren't informed. So, once again, to come to the Olympic Valley Public Service District or any of the other member agencies, make a presentation, and be able to inform our constituents, I think would be extremely helpful at this stage of the game, because having other people's opinion chime in that's in the negative could really cause some chaos and some heartburn for us here at the agency. And we've had enough heartburn in the past, and I want this to move forward in a positive manner, in a positive direction, so everybody can benefit equally across the board.
I'll reach out to Mike today and your fellow general managers.
That's my comment.
Thanks, Dale. Other questions or comments?
Yeah, regarding the river revitalization plan, how many current businesses are in there, and what is the acreage?
It's a great question. That's part of what that one first subcommittee is going to help us do. Is we don't really have a great estimate as to the number of businesses, and we do think it's important to have that conversation. Just because you have, again, the 4 acres now, is that what you would want in a receiver site? So we'll get all that information in the first phase.
Another question I have is, I understand that the Tahoe Forest Hospital District is still working to have that master plan folded in as well?
It won't be, it's a separate process.
Okay.
It won't be part of the general plan that's been approved. They'll have their own master plan, much like the rail yard has a master plan.
Okay.
There'll be a whole separate approval process, public meetings, community engagement.
Okay, so I guess I'm confused because on one of the slides.
The general plan has, the 2040 general plan refers to the hospital district's master plan, and working with them to develop that about 5 or 6 different times in some fashion. So it's just it's an action item to work with the hospital on your master plan that's held within the general plan.
In case they need expansion or something. I'm just trying to
they
understand.
envision a pretty significant expansion.
Okay.
And
Dale, you brought up a terrific point in that there are other agencies and other entities that we represent, and I think that this is critical. And a couple of bullet points I wrote down was using artificial intelligence to read the license plates in case there needed to be an evacuation. Being at the lake and knowing what the evacuation routes would be if something happened over there, I would hope that that plan, or before that plan is finalized, that North Tahoe PUD and the other agencies as well, because they'd be affected. And the flow of traffic is very limited, as we know. So I think, Dale, that's where I'm coming from, which is exactly where you're at, is the other entities need to be, and agencies need to be informed. So I think this presentation would be great. So,
could you put that together?
Yeah, I'll definitely reach out to the general managers and just see if I can.
Okay, and could I?
Absolutely.
Just once again, at this stage of the game, in order to soften the perception of what's going on here with the general public. I think, I know that there's companies out there that can analyze our operation with our new technology, with our new way of managing our effluent, that would give us and the public an idea of how, with our new technology and how safe we are, how close can we allow construction or development to come around our plant without being a threat to
Right.
people.
No, those are great comments. What I'm wondering, Dale, is maybe we could come back to that topic as part of our next agenda item, if that works for you.
It's
all
kind of
together.
mushed together.
Right. Dave, questions or comments?
Yeah, I'm with Dale, and I think about when I go back to my board and report on actions and so forth. It doesn't go any further. My board, they listen and they're all interested, but as far as the public in Alpine Meadows, they haven't a clue. And so I think it's vital that we put it out there for everybody to have a good look at. I'm very cautious about putting things next to the sewer plant. As our manager here says, since he's been in the business for a long while, there is no such thing as a good neighbor to a sewer plant. So that's something we need to put in our calculations.
Thanks, Dave. So I think one of the questions is whether or not we want to have someone from TTSA, I would assume someone from staff, participate in this committee. I think that was I think there's an offer being put forward to us that if we want to have someone participate in the committee, there's a seat for us. It seems like if we wanted to do that, I would think the general manager or someone that the general manager chose to appoint would be the right representative, unless one of the board members wanted to represent the agency on the committee. I would say I would not want to, just because it's a committee of the town. I work for the town. I want to maintain. My role here is as a TTSA board member, not as a town staff member. So,
are you looking at me for a comment?
I'm asking the question of the board. Are you guys good with asking staff to participate in the committee?
What level of, the steering committee meets on a...
We're still figuring out
Okay.
that date. So I think we're anticipating breaking into these subcommittee groups, and those subcommittees will meet more frequently throughout the summer. And then we're probably looking at a once a month or so schedule for at least the first year. And I did want to introduce Hillary Hobbs is here. She's our assistant to the town manager. Her and Carissa, who are our economic program manager, and myself will be leading this effort. So we have tried to keep Public Works as a whole, including Dana, out of the conversation on the town side. It's in a whole different division and department that this will be worked on.
And did you say that Truckee Donner PUD and the airport district were both
We've confirmed.
joined
Yes.
and are part of the steering committee?
Yes.
I mean, I personally think keeping an ear to the tracks as TTSA, if nothing else, as to what's going on in the committee has value. So I think it makes sense.
I would volunteer. I think I would like to be involved in it. I think it's critical.
So you're suggesting that you as a board member represent TTSA? On the
Yeah, and because I'm not part of the Truckee, I think that there would, at least
so.
at this point, would not be a conflict. But I think it's, I applaud the Truckees doing this because we are a region that needs to work together, and it's for a lot of people to get to the lake, they need to get through Truckee. I think that this, that's a great project.
Richard or Mike, do you guys have any thoughts on participating in the committee and staff versus board member participation?
I would just have, is it like airport and
Don or PD as, are they board level representation or
Staff.
staff
This
level?
is who they chose.
Do you anticipate some of the questions coming up being more operationally based to where staff would have perhaps a better ability to answer those questions as opposed to maybe conceptual?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think with your participation, whatever form, will we be looking at what are the potential opportunities down here that you could live with, or do you think would be reasonable? Where would that be if there's interest in that conversation? So I would defer to you if that's a staff or a board. And again, it's a Brownette committee, so there's nothing precluding, both the staff and board participation. It would just be who's sitting in the seat versus the committee.
Yeah, I would defer to the board for. I certainly can work close with Director Wilson if questions come up as far as operationally based questions go. As the GM, I would be interested in knowing where it's all headed for sure.
I think that, Scott, you volunteering on behalf of the board is spot on. Although I'd like to see participation from staff, of course. And whoever decides to do that would be, your choice. But while we're in the infancy stages of this dialogue, there's one thing that I'd like to point out when we talk about real estate and real estate issues with the agency. We have a long time negotiation and unfulfilled contract with the airport district in our land exchange. And I know we're just about there to be able to negotiate the final, getting our boundaries and everything together. And I would really like to see us get a contract signed with the airport district and our land and our boundary lines carved in stone, so to speak, before we trudge forward with some more real estate negotiations with where we're headed here. So the way it's headed, we're going to have 2 open books that are going to be consuming a lot of time on behalf of the agency and our board. And I'd like to simplify things as much as we can, and that would mean finally negotiating our airport district and TTSA negotiations to a final, and then we can sit back and move forward with whatever else that we want to deal with our land exchange or our surplus property issues. I think it would make things a lot more simple.
Right. And my understanding on that is we did negotiate a final contract, and it's just a matter of following through with it at this point.
Inking.
Right.
Inking.
And I think it was contingent on getting feedback from the FAA, which has since occurred. So.
I'm just going to cycle back to the item here, which is, participation in the steering committee. And, A, do we do it? And B, who would be our representative? And I'm hearing kind of a general consensus that, let's participate in this. And Scott, I really appreciate you volunteering. I guess my take would be that I'd prefer to see a staff person. That this land use thing is a tricky thing that's going to come back to the board. It's a policy decision. I think there's a variety of opinions on the board, and I think that the committee is going to be pretty pragmatic. The other potential receiver site representatives or staff people, and that we get reports back from staff, and then as a group make policy decisions as opposed to a board member representing TSA at that committee, and possibly making it's just I think it's a more challenging position. I totally appreciate your interest in it and your willingness to participate, but I think it's more appropriate to have Richard or his designated staff person be that steering committee member.
Are you talking about two committee members?
No, there's just going to be one.
Just one.
I don't know whether the committee bylaws or whatever allow for an alternate or anything, but I would say that, we designate a staff person, and I would,
Ask Richard either to participate or to designate someone.
yes, exactly.
And then the
So-
staff would report back to us?
Yeah, exactly.
And if any of us as board members wanted to attend a committee meeting,
Absolutely.
we've got the option to do that as a member of the public.
Yeah, and I go back to the point what Dale said, is that we do have constituents in other areas that this project definitely is going to impact, and so I think it's critical that that be part of the focus as well. And I'm totally happy that we have great staff here, so
Okay.
no problem with that.
Are you okay with that? Are you
Asking me?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah,
Yeah, I'm okay with that.
okay. Okay. So I think I heard, Gord, you comfortable with that?
Yeah, absolutely.
Direction, Richard? Okay, and so we'll let Richard take it from there.
That's okay. That's fine as far as a board direction. I know it was just agendized as a presentation and not, there's no motion action, just direction
Thanks
to
for bringing us the comment.
have Richard participate.
It's an informal.
Committee.
It's
Okay,
going to head off.
great.
Thank you. Welcome to the team.
All right, thanks, Dave. I didn't ask for public comment on that item, so we haven't closed it yet. Is there any public comment on the general plan presentation?
Hi, David Diamond again. I just wanted to thank Director Cox for the comment about the public outreach. I think that it's a very significant recognition from all of you that we are thinking of regional constituents. I'm on the airport board. You've got 4 airport board directors here, plus our general manager. So we are thinking, we recognize that we share constituents, and that what's good for ours is good for yours because they are the same people. So I really appreciate that. And what you're saying, Director Cox, is so important because there's so many moving pieces in all of these discussions, and people get little chunks of it, but they don't get the entire story. And then when they find other parts of the story, they find that they now do support it or they now don't support it, but there is confusion. So I appreciate that.
Thanks, Dave. Any other public comment? Seeing none, that was just a presentation, no action other than the general direction we gave to Richard. Next on the agenda is review and discussion of agency-owned property for current and future uses. I think Andrew's going to take the lead on this. And I think this was a follow-up from a board meeting back in March that we had where we were curious as to what encumbrances we might have on the property, what options we have with the property that we currently own, and this is a follow-up to that.
That's right. This is a follow-up from, actually, it's your February meeting where you received a presentation from staff on the current status of TTSA real property. And the direction to me was to come back with really sort of a procedural discussion about the legal restrictions on TTSA real property. If you were hypothetically going to think about disposing of real property in the future, what would be the legal restrictions on doing so? So to orient yourselves, there's a memo in the board packet. There's also a slide presentation, which each of you have received a copy of, and I think there's some additional copies next to the door. So let's say the last presentation was all about vision and potential. This presentation is all about the detail, getting into the weeds, a process-driven discussion. You're going to see a PowerPoint by an attorney who is not good at colorful pictures, not good at anything but putting words on the page. Sorry about that. This is not meant to be exciting. It is just meant to let you know what's coming if you go down this path. Next slide, please. So the purpose is really, again, to discuss the legal process and the requirements regarding how TTSA would dispose of surplus real property in the future. I'm going to start by discussing some of the background on the agency and the status of how it acquired real property in Martis Valley. I'll then summarize the restrictions on TTSA's ability to dispose of surplus real property. And then finally, I'll discuss a hypothetical potential process for disposing of surplus real property, the way that I would order that process if I were in charge, but I'm not in charge. All of you are in charge. So it could look very different in the future. from what I've laid out. I'll put sort of the conclusion up front. My review concludes that while there are some significant process requirements the TTSA must follow, it appears to be legally feasible that the agency could authorize disposition of surplus real property if it deems appropriate through the board. But also significantly, disposing of real property may include restrictions on both buyers and future uses of surplus property to protect TTSA's mission. And I know that's a critical concern that's on all of your minds. Director Cox even mentioned this in the last presentation. There are a few limitations on this analysis that I want you to be aware of. So first, we talked about getting title reports for property. That ended up to be a significant undertaking. We're talking about 900 plus acres of property with 9 parcels. When I contacted the title company on your behalf, they said, this is going to take us a long time. We'll put you in the queue, but you're likely looking at months even from now. So we're in the queue for that process. There's a hefty expense involved as well for doing this work. So based on the feedback that I get from you, we can either think about suspending that work or allowing it to go forward. But I'm going to leave that discussion really towards the end based on the feedback that I received from you on this presentation. Second, this analysis really doesn't consider potential incompatibilities between current TTSA uses of property or future uses and the potential disposition of property. This is the issue that Director Cox was talking about. I have not done that analysis. I have not looked at pieces of property and said, this is probably incompatible with X uses. That is far beyond my skill set. That is something that you would need to look to staff and potentially consultants to assist you with. Third, nothing in the presentation or memo should be construed as recommending any specific action to move ahead. This is simply informational, and again, the board's decision. Okay, slide 3, background. TTSA was formed in 1972 by a special act of the California legislature with the mission to, as you know, treat and dispose of wastewater flows generated by the member agencies that you represent. And we'll come back to that mission as part of the discussion later, because it's really core, I think, to the options that you have. In 1975, TTSA purchased approximately 214 acres of property by grant deed. It's the property on which we're sitting right now, and it would ultimately become the site of the wastewater reclamation facility. That was the first big TTSA land acquisition that I'm aware of. At the same year, TTSA received a $24 million grant from the US EPA for construction of the facility. And as I discussed in the memo, that grant included limitations on the disposition of real property that was acquired using federal funds. It's one of the issues that we are keeping on our radar through this discussion. And I'm going to discuss it more later when we talk about potential restrictions. Then in 1982, TTSA purchased 540 acres of property. These are generally the lands south and west of where we're sitting. And it's now considered the buffer zone, and lands that are reserved for future operational needs. Includes the lands that are subject to the Tahoe Truckee USD bus barn lease, as well as the lands that are part of the Airport District Exchange. Then finally, in 2006, TTSA acquired a donation of approximately 185 acres from Teichert, generally the lands east of where we are now. We'll talk about the restrictions on those lands later. Next slide. So I've broken down the presentation the same way as the memo, but we're going to proceed through these at a pretty good clip. Really 3 categories of requirements that you need to keep in mind as we talk about the potential disposition of surplus lands. And I'm going to use the term disposition throughout, or dispose, to mean really any manner of disposing of property. Sale, exchange, transfer, all of that is wrapped up in dispose. First, there's the general requirements. Here we're looking at the Agency Act and other procedural and substantive requirements that really apply to any disposition of real property by the agency. Next category of requirements would be the Surplus Land Act requirements. These are state laws governing how TTSA and other local agencies may dispose of real property that has become surplus, not necessary for the agency's mission. Then finally, we're going to talk about property-specific requirements to the extent known. These are requirements that attach to any specific parcel of property. And again, I come back to the Teichert gift lands, which are subject to a significant restriction that we'll discuss later. Next slide, please. So first, the general requirements. The Agency Act that created the agency really gives broad authority to the board of directors to acquire and dispose of real property with no express limitations in the act. We were concerned that there might be some restriction based on how the state formed the agency, on what you could do with those initial lands that the agency acquired. That's not part of the act. But that broad authority isn't unlimited. A transfer by any public agency, including TTSA, must be done for adequate consideration. And primarily this means that the transfer must serve an authorized public purpose of TTSA. So if there's an authorized public purpose to disposition of land and benefit to TTSA, we're probably good. On the other hand, if there is some benefit to a private party, or if there's benefit to another party that does not serve the interests of TTSA, that's where we start to get concerned. And the reason is TTSA is a special act agency. It's a special district, essentially. Its mission is relatively narrow. It's to ensure the safe and legal disposition of wastewater from your member agencies. It is not a general law entity like a city or county. It does not have the authority of the town, for example, to act for the public good or the general good. Really, your acts are confined to those acts that are allowed by the Agency Act, which is generally to benefit your member districts and the mission of TTSA for disposition of wastewater. And this is a core concept, and it's a tough one for people to wrap their heads around because they think of TTSA as a public agency, which it is, but it is a special district, a special type of agency with a limited mission. So we keep that in mind when we're talking about transfers from the TTSA perspective. Finally, CEQA compliance may be an issue in any disposition of public real property. It's something that we would look at depending on the terms of a potential transfer. It really happens at the back end, but it is a general requirement that we keep in mind. Next slide. So let's talk about the Surplus Land Act, or I'll call it the SLA or the Act at times. It was amended a few years back to expand its scope in light of the massive housing crunch in California in general. Its purpose is to provide a right of first refusal to entities interested in developing affordable housing or open space on public property. And it applies to all types of local agencies, including TTSA and your member agencies, as I'm sure you're aware. Under the SLA, land that is going to be disposed of is generally divided into two categories. You have surplus lands that are subject to the Act and its procedural requirements, and you also have exempt surplus lands that, for some reason or another, as provided by law, are not subject to the SLA, and you don't have to comply with the SLA requirements. In reviewing the SLA for the memo that I prepared, as well as this presentation, it became apparent that there's one or more exemptions that would potentially apply to TTSA's disposition of real property. And I've selected a few likely exemptions for discussion today. The first exemption, I think, is really the big one, and it applies to transfers of real property that are done in a manner to protect the agency's sensitive governmental operations. Next slide. And I'll admit, as a lawyer, this exemption is an odd one because the SLA has a list of exemptions, and this one is not in it. What it says instead is, the SLA generally defines surplus land to be those lands that are not necessary for the agency's mission anymore. So you would think surplus lands are lands that the agency is thinking of disposing of transferring to others. But what the SLA does is it also defines what agency's use is, to say that an authorized agency use, an authorized non-surplus property, is one that the agency is thinking of getting rid of, but with significant restrictions to protect its future operations. And what's interesting about this definition, and I put it up on the screen, it doesn't make a ton of sense unless you parse the whole thing. But again, it says that non-surplus lands can include lands that you might decide to get rid of, but with restrictions to protect their use. And what's pretty cool about this, from my perspective, on the next slide, you'll see in very tiny language. Sorry. It's more apparent on your slides. That it actually includes a statement here. I'll point it out so everyone can see it. The agency's use may include lands that are disposed of to support the agency's mission, including buffer sites near sensitive governmental uses, including but not limited to wastewater treatment plants. I think it goes back to Director Smelser's statement that everyone recognizes that it's hard to be a good neighbor to a wastewater treatment plant. That is recognized in the SLA. And the impact is that the agency may rely on this exemption under appropriate circumstances to dispose of land and make it exempt from the Act while restricting its future uses and potentially future buyers. Let's go to the next slide, please. So back to other potential exemptions. I consider that to be the big one, given the discussion and sort of the operations of the TTSA plant. But other potential exemptions include a land exchange. Whether to a private entity or a public entity, a land exchange is exempt from the SLA. Excuse me. Also exempt, transfers to all manner of governmental and tribal entities. For governmental entities, it could be state, local, or federal. If the transferee is one of those, then the transfer is exempt from the SLA. Also, federally recognized tribal entities are exempt as well. And then the fourth exemption, legally infeasible for housing. This is a bit of a strange exemption. If a property is subject to legal restrictions that make it infeasible to develop for housing in the future, it is exempt from the SLA. Those legal restrictions cannot be imposed by TTSA. They must be imposed by a different party, and simply zoning of the property for a use other than non-residential is not included as a legal restriction here. So it's sort of a limited exemption, but we'll talk about it in a moment again in the context of the Teichert gift lands. If one or more exemptions apply, then the TTSA board may declare the property exempt from the SLA and adopt supporting findings. That declaration then goes to the California Department of Housing and Community Development for review for a 30-day period. After that 30-day period expires, the property is exempt from the SLA, and the agency may dispose of it as it sees fit through whatever process. Next slide, please. Now we're talking about surplus lands that are not exempt, the so-called surplus lands that are subject to the SLA. So after declaration by the TTSA board that a certain property is surplus, the agency must notify certain affordable housing and open space entities. If one or more entities responds, then TTSA must enter into good faith negotiations with that entity for at least 90 days. At the end of 90 days, we again notify HCD that the process has completed. It's important to remember that these rules are really procedural in nature. They don't require any certain outcome. They don't require the agency to dispose of property for less than fair market value, nor do they require property that's declared surplus to ultimately be sold. They're really just to give that right of first refusal to interested entities for the benefit of state policy.
If I may. So when I looked at what was sent out earlier, this really confused me. So if it's determined that there is potential surplus land, we notify other entities? What would be a process, or what? I was just curious, is that something on the website? Is it a notice on the paper?
Sure. So there's actually a database of potential entities maintained by HCD. We get the database from HCD and all the contact information. We put together a letter that meets their requirements, and then we simply send it out to all those entities and wait for a response.
And those entities might be?
Usually affordable housing developers, affordable housing community groups. There's other open space entities that are on the list as well, typically defined in those categories. And there may be some additional interested entities as well.
Okay, thank you.
One open question from the SLA is, let's say hypothetically, the board finds that there is surplus property, but it is not exempt from the Act. You don't rely on one of those four exemptions. Could you still decide, for reasons necessary to protect TTSA operations, that you will sell surplus property, but you will restrict it so that it cannot be developed for housing in the future? So you haven't relied on exemption, you're going to sell it, but you're also going to include some sort of deed restriction saying this property may not be used for housing. Is that authorized? It's an unresolved question under the SLA. My initial conservative take is I think that you would have an issue doing that. If you don't rely on one of the exemptions, you likely could not restrict the property for housing, because that's contrary to the whole purpose of the SLA. The whole purpose is to make public property, when it is not exempt from the SLA, available for affordable housing. So if you were to thwart the purpose of it by throwing in a deed restriction saying no houses because you're right next to a wastewater treatment plant, I think that HCD or others would potentially have an issue with that. But again, that's only for property that you don't determine is exempt from the Act. Next slide. Okay, the third group of restrictions. So we've done the general restrictions, we've talked about the SLA restrictions, now we're talking about property-specific requirements. And I'll go through a couple of them. I think I've mentioned most of them in the presentation so far. The terms of the 1975 federal EPA grant limit TTSA's ability to dispose of any real property that was purchased with federal funds. It's a really significant limitation. It actually says that EPA basically gets to decide the disposition of any property that TTSA would like to sell if it was purchased with federal funds. But that said, I'm not sure that actually would affect your decisions as a practical matter. The only property that was purchased at about the same time as the grant funds were received was this property with the reclamation facility on it. It's likely not surplus land. I also don't have an indication that federal funds were used for this property anyway, because the terms of the grant, pulling out the 50-year-old document, don't have a line item for real property acquisition. It appears to have really been for construction of the plant itself and not for acquiring this property. And finally, those restrictions don't apply to any lands that you didn't purchase with federal funds. And I'm aware that the 82 purchase of the larger swath of lands that you currently consider to be the buffer site was not using federal funds. It was using bond funds and other funds as well. So they wouldn't be subject to this restriction. So this is one that's on our radar, but it's not necessarily a significant restriction. The next one, the TTUSD bus barn lease. So the property that was subject to a long-term lease to the school district contains a term saying that the property cannot be sold without district consent, and it provides a right of first refusal if the agency does look to transfer that property in the future. So that is an example of a property-specific restriction if you were to look to surplus that property. And then finally, I'll talk about the Teicher gift lands. Again, really small type. I apologize. This is the lawyer making PowerPoints when I probably shouldn't. But on the right side of the page, you may be able to read it on the handouts, but it includes a clause saying that the property that was gifted to TTSA from Teicher includes a deed restriction on it. And there may have been multiple properties, but this is in the form of a grant deed, and it's included in the gift agreement as well. And what it states is for 70 years, that Teicher property cannot be used for residential or commercial purposes, and it is a restriction that runs with the land, meaning that even if TTSA were to surplus that land, that covenant is recorded against the land, and it would continue on with the property, even if you were to sell it for some other use. So I consider that to be a good example of that exemption 4 in the SLA, the legal restriction making housing infeasible. The property is subject to a restriction on housing that is not imposed by TTSA. Pretty clear exemption from the SLA for that specific property. And then finally, we would have other restrictions revealed by a title search. There's likely to be other restrictions on lands that we're not aware of, but would be revealed through looking at the various exceptions to title through a title report. Next slide. So, summarizing the discussion, looking at this, I think of the requirements as being sort of the 3 Ps: purpose, process, and property. Purpose, we keep in mind that the disposition of TTSA property must be for an authorized purpose that furthers TTSA's mission of disposing of wastewater safely for the benefit of the member districts. Process, we keep in mind the Surplus Lands Act and all of its requirements as well as CEQA on the back end. And then finally, property. We keep in mind what are the specific requirements for that piece of property as revealed through a title report and any other knowledge of the property's requirements, including potential incompatibilities with TTSA operations, which are something that would be at the forefront of your minds if you continue with this process. So in conclusion, as I said before, I think it's legally feasible to dispose of surplus rail property, and it's legally feasible to impose restrictions as appropriate through the significant exemption from the Surplus Lands Act. But that said, it's likely that you'd want to think about restrictions on surplus property to protect TTSA operations, and that is a bigger piece of the puzzle that we really haven't reached yet. Next. So a potential process outline, I've laid out what I think of as sort of 5 steps with multiple sub-steps to each on how the TTSA board might proceed. And you're really at step 1 or even before step 1 at this point, which I think of as being identification of property and needs. What are the agency's needs? What do you have? What might you want to surplus and why? So really the sub-step here is board direction to move ahead, probably through a subsequent meeting because this is just agendized for discussion only at this point, potential direction to staff. But what sort of process do you want to set up if you are going to consider these issues further? I'd also put identification of potential transferees as a optional step in this first process, because knowing who you might consider transferring property to and which property you would be considering transferring is really helpful in thinking about Surplus Land Act exemptions, all of the other issues that we've discussed today, and how you might study these issues further. Step 2, pre-negotiation property evaluation. This is really where we do our due diligence in step 2 from TTSA's side, where we think about getting the title reports, reviewing them in detail for all of the exceptions, looking at appropriate use restrictions, and bringing on expert consultants, whether it's an expert appraiser, expert broker, to help you know what is the suitability of this land, what's its potential value, or thinking about having a consultant, as Director Cox mentioned, to say what are the potential incompatibilities and the risks of surplusing land. And then we also evaluate Surplus Land Act exemptions at this step. Once we know what the property is and who the potential transferees are, we're able to evaluate whether one of those 4 exemptions might apply. Step 3, Surplus Land Act compliance. This is where we either find the property is subject to the act or not, and we put together a declaration from the board. This is another step where the board acts directly in the process, either by finding the land is exempt or engaging in the act process, like I was describing in response to Director Wilson's question. Next slide. Step 4, negotiations, likely through the agency's designated real property negotiators. As we've done in the past, the agency may designate up to 2 real property negotiators from the board as well as staff to engage in negotiations on its behalf. And remember, too, that once we're at this step, this is probably where the closed session authorization kicks in, and you have further discussions in closed session because you're talking about the terms for a potential sale. And I want to acknowledge, we're talking really far down the process here. We're not even at step 1, so I'm going through a process right now that's really far out, and I acknowledge that. But it's good to see what the whole process looks like. And then finally, 5, draft of a purchase and sale agreement, potential CEQA compliance, and again, coming back to the board for approval. And it's worth emphasizing again that that first step starts with a board decision, and that final step ends with a board decision as well, because as I've said before, the real property surplus discussion is important, and it really is a board-driven discussion at the end of the day. Next slide. In conclusion, think about the 3 Ps: process, purpose, and property as we continue this discussion. But otherwise, my conclusion is it's legally feasible to dispose of surplus rail property with appropriate restrictions. We just have to observe the 3 Ps as we go along. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. That was very thorough. Questions or comments for Andrew from the board?
I got a question, Andrew. In 1975, the 214 acres was given to the agency by the California legislature, correct?
No, by a private landowner. The Yeager family, I may be pronouncing that incorrectly, but it was part of the Yeager family that actually made that grant to the agency.
Okay, and what about the 540 acres? Was that that was in 1982? TTSA was in operation. It was doing its job. That 540 acres, you said was a bond. It was a bond sale.
It was, again, a private acquisition from other members of the Yeager family, and it was a private acquisition that appears to have been funded through bond proceeds raised by the agency.
So TTSA did not go into their coffers to purchase this other 540 acres.
It did, but through a bond process rather than coming directly out of pocket. My understanding is there were bonds issued, and the revenue from those bonds was used to actually make the property acquisition. I think it was about $1.5 million.
Okay, so just for clarity, and I hate to ask this question again, Andrew, but TTSA did not have an out-of-pocket expense for the 540 acres.
I'm not aware, but the document that I saw, and sorry, I can't have a more definitive answer, but my understanding was it was bond proceeds. I don't know if it came out of pocket at that time.
But we would have had to have paid off those bonds.
Correct.
So,
Well,
but I think TTSA was out of pocket to buy that 540 acres. Correct?
Over time, yes. There were installments made to the Yeager family over time, probably through the bond
It wasn't
proceeds.
free land, it was purchased land.
Definitely not free.
Right.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, other questions or comments?
I have a comment back to go too far down this road. I'm in favor of going for a risk assessment study rather than, we don't even know what we're doing with any of this land until we talk to somebody about what the risks we're going to be looking at. And the other thing is that we still have that chlorine facility out there. It hasn't gone away yet. And I can't imagine giving up space in our buffer area until we are definitely done with the chlorine.
Agreed. Other comments, Dave?
No.
Okay. I have a question, Andrew. So you touched a few times on if we were going to surplus property, that it needs to be for an authorized public purpose that has, I guess, benefit to TTSA.
Yes.
So is generating capital, is generating dollars, does that meet that threshold?
Yes.
So if, for instance, we were selling land at market value and then using that money to fund capital improvements at the plant, that would be deemed an authorized public purpose.
In some ways, I think that's the clearest example of an authorized public purpose. Yes.
Okay.
Great question. That was what I was thinking. Same thing.
Right.
And would that also include leasing land for whatever purpose as a benefit to TTSA?
Yes, I'd agree with that.
To lease land, do you have to go through is that subject to the Surplus Land Act?
It is if the lease would be for longer than 5 years. That's considered to be a long-term disposition and does trigger the SLA.
Okay. And then
I missed that, I'm sorry. For what period of time?
5 years, Director Smelson. 5 years or more.
I got one final question, and this I'm sure that either Mike or Richard could answer. What's the sunset on our land agreement with Tigert, the 185 acres? It was strung out there to 2050 or something?
It's something like that. I don't remember the exact date off the top of my head, but it's out there a ways.
So
So
Dale,
actually, the 185 acres is, even though we have an agreement, it's not going to be finalized until Tiger is through with their operation, and the reclamation of the land that we allowed them to mine is going to, the 185 acres is not really in our purse yet,
Correct.
correct?
Yes.
Okay.
do we hold title to it, but there's a deed restriction, right?
So we, if I may.
Yeah, that's a question.
Yeah, we own the land, and they're leasing it from us. And that lease expires in, I think it's either 2052 or 2053, somewhere in that time frame.
Got it.
So at 2053, the 185 acres will be part of our portfolio.
It's part of our portfolio now because we own it, but I think in terms of deed restrictions, I believe they have a 70-year rider on that.
Correct. So even once the lease with Tiger ends, there would be another 20-plus years until the deed restriction ends, and it would be available for any use and not restricted to uses other than residential or commercial.
And the Tykert land that we're talking about is the light blue parcel, is that correct, Jay? That's adjacent to what's shown in yellow?
Yes.
And my understanding was that that was an agreement between TTSA and Tykert, where TTSA allowed Tykert to mine some land that TTSA owned in exchange for obtaining long-term public ownership of the Tykert land.
That's correct.
Okay.
So they wanted to mine in our property, which is in the darker blue, the 214.
I think there's an exhibit. There's another
Is there a
one
better
that
slide?
shows the mine of that area.
1 second, please.
I think if we go down, I'm looking at the presentation that was provided to us as part of
For the
the
board packet.
board packet.
So a couple slides down.
Yeah, it shows another slide that I think. Yeah, is that it?
There, that one where it says PF 41 acres.
Yeah, is that?
So in exchange for their permission or ability to mine the 41 acres, they gifted us the land that was adjacent to the yellow.
Got it. Now, if we as TTSA needed to use that property for agency purpose, is there an ability for that to occur, or is
On which piece?
on the land that we acquired from Tykert?
So the land we acquired from Piker has that 50-year lease, or up until 52, 53,
Right.
52, 53, and then there's this additional rider on top of that. So I believe it's not until 70 years, and I don't know when that time zero is, Andrew.
So that there's
2076. Right.
2070.
so the deed restriction is it can't develop for private purposes. The lease, I don't know what the terms of the lease are, if it's wholly exclusive or if it's just giving them the right to do reclamation out there. But if we have agency needs to use that property for agency purposes, if there's flexibility for that or not.
So I know there's a provision in there for Tiker's quiet use and enjoyment, and I imagine it would relate somehow to that, and whether our
So that would be a legal question we'd have to dive into if TTSA had some interest in doing something on that property other than maintaining it as passive open space.
I believe that would turn into a legal.
Yeah, okay. Okay, thanks. And then the 214-acre parcel that's to the left of the parcel we just talked about, it appears that's that 1975 purchase. So that was the original purchase TTSA made to build the wastewater treatment plant, build the I keep calling them infiltration wells, but the disposal fields.
SAT.
The SAT, all of that stuff, right?
I believe so.
Yeah. And then, so that would probably indicate that everything west of that was the 540-acre acquisition that happened in the early 80s.
That's what it appears.
That's what it looks like. Okay.
It's difficult to tell from the property descriptions, but generally based on the public land survey designations, that's the conclusion I reached. Yes.
Okay. Okay, thanks. One other, well, I may have more than one, but we've had the fire district come before us interested in land for a training facility. I've heard from the Truckee Donner Public Utility District that they want to build a new kind of maintenance and kind of base facility, if you will. Those are both, well, the PUD they actually have money they could probably buy land with. Not sure about the fire district. They were asking for free land and asking us to help build their fire training facility. I think the rec district expressed some interest potentially in land for future ball fields or something like that. When I brought this up to the Tahoe City PUD board, and the fact that these conversations were happening, our general manager piped up. He's like, we could potentially use some land for like just remote passive storage. I don't know I know TSD is in pretty good shape in terms of owning land for your facilities. I don't know if Alpine Springs or Olympic Valley or North Tahoe potentially have land needs. It's a little more remote in their facilities, but I know storage could be at a premium up here. So I'm rambling on a bit, but something that makes sense to me is if we as TTSA have land that's far enough away from our operation that we're comfortable that it doesn't pose a safety risk, and that's also land that another public entity could put to use to meet their service needs. That feels like a very that's a comfortable dynamic in my mind. And I know TTSA did that with the school district with the bus barn a number of years ago. The question I've got though is, let's say we as TTSA said, kind of put the word out locally that we're having this conversation. And then let's say it's like, the PUD wants to buy some land, the Tahoe City PUD wants to buy some land, Truckee Donner wants whatever. How targeted can we be at, I guess it comes back to that exempt surplus lands definition in terms of actually kind of negotiating a deal with them versus not. And I think it comes down to, is it exempt surplus land or is it not exempt surplus land? And we'd have to cross that bridge when we got to it. But are there any restrictions on us asking that question just of other public entities?
No, there's no restriction on asking the question. We do need to be a little bit careful because the SLA is triggered, whether for exempt or non-exempt lands, by entering into negotiations. I see negotiations as being a discussion between TTSA representatives and identified interested parties on the other side in talking about the terms of a potential deal. Asking who's interested, what might you be interested in from our portfolio of land, that's not a negotiation. You haven't triggered the SLA at that point. But if you go one step further, that's the point at which I would insist that you think about making a declaration in an open public meeting about whether the lands that you're talking about are exempt lands or non-exempt lands.
Okay, thanks. So that's helpful because I'm pretty cautious about us as TTSA dealing directly with like potential private landowners in
We're
the
not
future.
in the real estate business.
No. Talking with other public entities, that's not too far out of bounds from my perspective. And then, what the town's looking at, that's kind of an interesting one because they're potentially looking at being a middleman for the private sector. So, which kind of, like I said, I'm not interested in getting into the real estate development game as TTSA.
This can get very confusing.
It could.
very complex, and it's going to take further discussion to the point where we might have to have consultants. Andrew, you've done a great job assessing and giving us an update of where we are at this time. But I'm just wondering whether or not there is other sources of information out there that are more tuned in to our specific needs that we might tap into. But this is opening the door to a very, very long, complicated process, which I hope that it doesn't turn into a bureaucratic nightmare for this agency, because we got a lot on our plate on a regular basis without having to deal with this.
So Dale, both you and Dave brought up the notion of some form of risk assessment as it relates to the plant, and I see that there's a couple levels to that in my mind. One is just health and safety risk, and the second is nuisance, right? Like people, more people close to the plant, that then generates more odor complaints for TTSA to deal with, right? So is that what you had in mind?
Here's the situation, the way I feel representing Olympic Valley Public Service District. We have an obligation to keep the public safe. This is our major concern as directors, is to run a safe operation to make sure that we do our job and we keep the public safe. And I can't, and I don't see where any of us would have the expertise to determine what that safety level is as far as for encroaching on our property. I feel that we should, and we might have already done this, Jay, as far as having a reserve piece of real estate for our soil aquifer treatment and any future expansion. I think that was addressed in the Carrillo report, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, Carly.
And so we have an idea of what we're going to need to address our needs into the future, but it's the risk assessment of allowing construction and people occupying property close to the plant. It's our duty, as I see it, to make sure that we keep those people and those entities, whoever it may be, safe. And so I feel that at this stage of the game, one of the first things we should do as an agency is put out an RFP or whatever it would take to find an entity that could help us figure and help us be able to realize what our risk is with our new technology that we have in place, i.e. if chlorine disappears. It hasn't disappeared yet, correct, David, as I understand it. And with chlorine gone from our process, we should be able to free up more land than
In the past.
than we have in the past. But the risk assessment is our guarantee from a third party to give us an idea of what we have available as surplus land. Until we have that assessment, I really think that we'd be putting the cart in front of the horse, making any kind of commitments to anybody as far as for what we have available for surplus land.
I agree with that, Dale, and that's a two-part issue. We also want to know who's moving in on this land, and is it going to be the junk show from the East River, and they're going to pollute the land, and we get blamed for well 31. So I would like to see that risk assessment go both ways. What can they allow on the land nearby? And what, look at both of those issues.
Got it.
Our risk to others and their risk to us.
Thanks, Dave. If there's more board comments, that'd be great. Otherwise, I can open this up for public comment and then bring it back to the board. Is there any public comment on this item? All right, seeing none, we'll go ahead and close public comment. Okay, we'll close public comment. Any other questions or comments by the board? This is not an action item for us. It's basically, we were receiving a report from staff that we had requested a number of months ago. So we've got that. There's a lot of detail here, a lot of great information. Heard a suggestion from...
I would like to move forward with an educational process for the member districts. Now, I don't really, I care that what the rest of the member districts do, that's their business. I would like to see your presentation at our board meeting so that the constituents of Olympic Valley would know and understand what's going on here. And, whenever you could fit that into your busy schedule, I would talk to our general manager and see what kind of schedule we could have on our agenda to accommodate you. And we could start the educational process for the Olympic Valley Public Service District constituents, because they are the people that I answer to. And so I just think that the education is something we should start today.
Jen, a question. The committee process you outlined and the presentation you gave earlier, it sounds like a long process. I mean, it doesn't sound like, I don't think there's anyone with cash in pocket, maybe Truckee Donner PUD, I don't know.
I got cash.
Bucks, but yeah, that's like knocking on the door saying we need this land right now, or else we've got some initiative that's going to fail. I think there's time for this conversation to play out on a healthy schedule that kind of allows us as TTSA to do a thorough evaluation of the things that we need to evaluate. That's not necessarily kind of impeding other initiatives that might be out there. Is that? I mean, that's my read on it.
It's going to be a multi-year process. For sure.
Right. So I don't think we need to feel like we're under the gun to hurry up and make a decision one way or the other. I think we can be thoughtful and deliberative in this conversation. Make sure we've got the information we need so that we can decide how to what the best way forward is.
When we deal with situations like this in Olympic Valley, the wheels of progress turn very slow. And whatever we can do at the agency to do our part to be in the proper timeline, there's no sense putting off a risk assessment, being able to get professional consultation of where we are right now as an agency with what we may have available for surplus sale.
So, how does it sound to the board members if we asked Richard on a future agenda to bring a item back so we could have a more detailed conversation about a potential risk assessment? And that might give you all some time to think about what that might entail and how we might go about doing it. Okay. I guess it's a question. I've heard at least two board members suggest that. I think it's a good idea. Scott and Blake.
I keep coming back to the sodium hypochlorite because right now that project looks like the returns are going to be very good on it. And I think that once we determine 100% that's the direction we're going to go, that would help define the risk assessment. Because right now, how do you risk assess something?
Like option A and option B right now. Right. Yeah.
Well, there's two kinds of risks. There's physical risks, And then there's the odor. And we spent a lot of money here a few years ago. Time flies when you're having fun, but how long ago, Jay, did we do the carbon filter and all this stuff for our odor management?
16, 17 years ago.
But that was when we were getting complaints from Glenshire, from people coming up Highway 80. I mean, the odor that came out of this, out of this facility was significant. And the physical risks are one thing, but the odor can also be something that we have to deal with, by having close by neighbors.
Yeah, and it's kind of a question of, is it us that's dealing with it, or is it are we expecting partnerships in dealing with it? So, for instance, I was working for the town when the Legacy Trail got built, TTSA had some caution about the additional foot traffic that it was going to create near the plant, concern that there was going to be people potentially wandering onto the premises. So part of the deal there was TTSA allowed that trail to get built, but required additional fencing and additional security infrastructure be constructed as a part of that agreement. Mm-hmm. There could be those types of things that would come into play as a part of future conversations or negotiations too. So, Blake, your thoughts on having a future discussion on this risk assessment?
Yeah, it sounds like a good idea. I mean, with 900 acres, I'm not surprised we're at this point where, in a growing community, there's interest in possibly utilizing it. And so this has been a great primer for us. And, we've got kind of the outline of what needs to be done and, to protect our interests. Some sort of risk assessment might be really valuable. I think
One other question I'd like to ask the other board members: what are your thoughts about us as TTSA communicating directly with public agencies in the region, letting them know that we're having this conversation, not being committal, but like, for instance, I had the conversation with the Tahoe City PUD staff about, hey, would each of us want to bring that question back? I'm just kind of curious as to what the universe of interest is in the land that we own.
Can I be first on this comment?
Absolutely.
I think what we should do, Dan, is we should move forward with a risk assessment and find out what we have available after we figure out what we're going to do, taking the Carrillo report and what we need for future expansion and what the risk is for the agency. Then, once we get those studies together, then we will realize and know how much real estate we do have for surplus sale. And I think that we ought to not engage in any dialogue with anybody until we know and understand what we have for surplus.
Okay.
That's my take on it.
Yeah, I think that could set expectations
Yes.
and create possibly anxiety amongst those that haven't been, approached.
Yeah.
That they're out of it, and then you end up with, both of those high expectations and people with anxiety that they're not being considered. And so I'd keep it a little bit quieter and go through this process, and then we'll have to eventually decide, if our conclusion is that there's some level of use outside of just buffer lands, how we go about determining what, if any, uses we want, and solicitation process and so on.
Okay.
But I'd say it's early for that to get sidetracked.
Okay.
I mean, I think we're already partly there. I mean, there's
People know
folks
about it.
attending here. We've had other folks show up, and so, but I wouldn't add to that at this point. I think it's early.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Any further dialogue? No? Any other comments, Dave?
No, I'm good.
You're good? Okay. All right. Thanks. That concludes that item. Thanks all. See all these smiling faces in the audience?
Dan, can I recommend just like maybe a 5 minute.
Yeah, I was almost going to do that after the last one.
Can we take 5 minutes?
Absolutely. Run to the front of the line.
We're taking a 5-minute break for right now.
Of course, yeah. I think we should be making a
See you. Thanks. Hey, how are you?
How am I doing, Dave? Oh, man, it's all good. It's all
Nice volunteer to be on the committee. Volunteers and stuff. Only because I'm not a resident in district. Especially in some pieces.
moving the budget should start to use that space.
So I feel like we are.
That was my call. I know everybody else on that, but I think we'll be involved in it first. Yeah, that was my.
Good job.
These two.
You stayed here already.
We have another agenda.
I've been dealing with you guys that
Tough decision. You're going to get a lot of
Take our interest into
You're going to feel like a real politician. You're going to feel like you're going to get a lot of property. Yeah.
Walk through the process.
could be.
I operate that way.
So is it going to be?
What time are you guys doing?
It starts at for the long-term trust.
We got all our stuff. Our materials is the other day.
And putting it all on top of the smartest valley. The main biggest outlet in this whole region is going to sit back.
Good news is, I know
We're like camping out on the property.
we talk about this all the time.
I mean, just through
That's Dr. Wax and Dan and Blake have some baggage.
I think they're both aware of it.
And I don't want to sound like seminars.
everything on this everything is the way it is.
Thanks, Dave. I just watched my hands. You can always I know, thanks, Jerry. If we keep going, probably will be.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. I think so. What do you think? It looks like a Christmas tree. Too much bread. I'm going to have to they have a cream. You allow that and let the other.
One opportunity for something.
Probably something to evaluate what is the real opportunity out there, too.
Yeah, but it's the thing about it is it's become like it's like it's not a solution anymore.
Yeah, it's not even in the county.
Right,
It's in the county.
You're right. Exactly.
remember I figured out, like, oh, wait a minute, we're going to own property in that. Because right now, all TTSA's land is in the town. And that would actually be...
You're doing a good job there, girlfriend.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, which isn't that big of a deal. But,
Oh, okay, so it's...
but for industrial, move out there and move all the tax base out there. I don't know why the town would want to do that, but maybe they would. That's not my question to answer. But
All right, well, good meeting.
all right, see you guys. Good. Yep, we'll see grab some food real quick.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
You bet.
How you feeling, David?
For doing that.
How you feeling?
Thank you for your comment.
You still doing good?
I tested positive yesterday.
Did you? I'm glad we set this up. How's Patty
There's a lot
doing?
of shit going on here.
Yeah, they're dragging.
Was that who those were?
Yeah, the airport was.
She's still positive as well.
You guys
And I
are
got to
feeling
thank
okay
you for
though?
bringing up
You
the
getting through
conflict
it?
of interest potential. Very important. I was losing a little bit of sleep on that, only because.
It's not too bad.
You being the
You
president.
guys are still getting outside, moving around. That's good.
Facilitating and addressing this on behalf of the board. And had a little bit of a smell. And we got to be careful, Dan, because there's deep pockets out there that are going to, the Sierra Club, and the Sierra Watch are going to be looking right down our throats.
That's what I'm curious about because TTSA has held this as passive open space for 50 years. I'm curious what the environmental interest groups are going to think about the potential
And you have no idea on the amount of people that recreate on our property.
Sure, there's a lot of
Bird watchers, dog watchers, just people that want to get away from noise and anything. They walk out there.
We got no business being in the middle of
Good job.
that kind of
Reading through and sending the board packets and legal things.
I think that let's put it this way,
The entire yellow.
if this moves forward,
I had a question.
Just highlight the whole.
way
I was close.
it's like a real democracy. I'm not going to be there.
If you had kind of something going on.
You may, but probably not.
When you're working with another agency.
So as this thing starts moving forward, it's going to be a whole other board that deals with what's going on, but it's up to us to lay the groundwork with that risk
It's a good question. I
study.
don't want to throw anybody under the bus, but
What we have
Unintended.
Yeah, I know.
Everybody else worry about it, because this is going to take
It actually made
a
me
long time.
recalibrate a lot of my
And,
thoughts.
the date that they
it's not
have is 20
unusual
to
for
40.
agencies to want to do good.
It might be
In general, not unusual. Everyone should do that.
30, 32.
It's not what we do. We do baseline.
And Dan, do you realize that TTSA sits under the majority of the real estate under this region's most plentiful aquifer? The Marcus Valley Aquifer. Where we're sitting on, we gave the town, PUD permission to grow a well on our property. The mother of all wells. And they're not even scratching the surface. So, with that, coming in, and not to mention it, but you can be assured that other people realize it.
Yeah.
Tape running.
Let's kick over to management team reports. Oh, did we lose Dave?
Recording in progress.
Nope, he's here.
Okay. So management team reports. Who would like to go first? First.
go.
All right, thank you.
Okay, cool.
All right, good morning, Board of Directors. I am happy to announce that all plant waste discharge requirements were met for the month. The plant performed well for the month. The sodium hypochlorite project continues to perform well. The water information management solution software is currently being utilized and nearing completion. For the laboratory, the staff performed the necessary laboratory testing. The lab staff are in the process of implementing quality systems improvements. And the lab assessment was completed on May 31st, and the report for that is pending and should be out here in the next few days. And then next slide, please. I already went through the lab. Next one. These are supposed to be.
Pause.
All right, Greg, you're going to have to ad lib.
Yeah. Yeah, if you
That's
could,
okay.
if you could
I
just keep
just have
going.
one more picture to show you guys. It was just one of the operators. We were clearing up the drain for it was the original site where we had a chemical delivery station that has no longer been in use since the new AWT was built. And then we were clearing the drain that was mothballed and filled with grout, and then that drain will probably be used for future use for the sodium hypochlorite project. And that will contain any delivery spills that could occur during that process.
Cool. Thanks. All right. Paul, go next.
Morning, President Wilkins and board. All right. So as you can see from the report up there, very similar to last month, we've got roughly 38 mechanical, 19 fleet, and 19 electrical instrumentation, 12 work orders completed. About the same as last month. A lot of that is due to some of the larger projects that we accomplished for the month. So some of the project support that we provided was for digestion improvements, ongoing work on the sodium hypochlorite project and testing, and SCADA IT master plan implementation, which is still ongoing. We anticipate having a board report to you sometime in September or October. We're continuing on with Lucity CMMS project. We're rapidly approaching warehouse implementation in the next couple of months. So hopefully more to report to the board at that time. We continue to offer support for the LIMS project and the chlorine scrubber project for the maintenance activities of the month. Can we get to the pictures, please?
Sounds like no pictures today. Oh, there we go.
Is your all?
No, those are the right ones. All right. As you can see there, we got the AWT storage containers. If you may be familiar, we've had some storage containers back behind that building for quite some time. They've become a home for marmots underneath and things, and that preps us for the site clearance for the sodium hypochlorite project, the more permanent structures. So we've got those pulled out of there. Got a good picture of our staff doing a TWAS pump rebuild. And for the month, we did complete the Lahontan flow verification that we do roughly every 6 months. Next slide, please. And part of that, we had to dig out by hand the ramparts telemetry. And you can see there is some vandalism on that cabinet there. We do seem to keep fighting some of the ongoing vandalism at different sites along our road and some of the telemetry sites.
What type of vandalism?
Spray painting, things like that, tagging.
Okay. Not people trying to steal copper or anything like that?
Not yet.
Yeah.
No. We are seeing some more prevalence of dumping and things too along the road, so we're trying to stay up on that a little bit. I think we were working on that at one of the last reports, but it's ongoing. And it does seem to be ramping up in frequency. This is one of the bigger ones for us, the DNR inflow pump install. This has been a long time coming. We've had a lot of problems with one of our vendors getting this pump back. So glad to have that in operation and be back to full service for operations. It's a very critical pump station for our BNR influent. So just more pictures of that process, coming in through the skylight, bringing in the motor there, dropping in the pump. So that was a fun project for us. So we're glad to have that done. And that is a picture of us doing the peak conveyor auger for our dewatering system. So staff working diligently on that and doing a lot of the work in-house. And that's all I got for you. Any questions?
Any questions for Paul? No? All right. Great. Thanks. Jay?
I think I can still say this. Good morning. President, welcome, directors. So, engineering report. Chlorine scrubber improvements project construction. We are in the last throes. We have a couple items that need to be finished before we're fully functional on the scrubber. The roof project, we're in contract bonds and insurance. We're going to be probably starting that soon. Anticipate to be next week. Digital scanning project, we're in bid review. We got a really good bid price this year, so we're still reviewing the bids, but we'll let you know next month as to the status of that. Next slide, please. Digestion improvements project, we've been making really good traction in getting interest in the job from several consultants who over the last couple of months have come up and spoken with us at length about this project. So we're in the midst of tweaking our scope and getting that dialed in. Filter and flow condition assessment project, study phase, we're still waiting on equipment on that one. Sodium hypochlorite full-scale project, we're in study phase. So the idea is that provided that the pilot still goes well, that we're developing plans and ideas for what we're doing full scale. And then finally, same thing on the scope for the TRI. Again, we're getting great traction with consultants just over the last month or so. So we're in scope development on that one as well.
Question, Jay. So it talks about the sodium hypochlorite being in a study phase. How long does staff think we'll need to be able to evaluate that disinfection process to get to a point where we're feeling comfortable that that's a viable solution for the long term?
So I'll largely let Ops answer that, but I'll start by saying that we started this job on the pilot, operating the pilot in the winter. And there were concerns that, how would this pilot system do in the summer because off-gassing concerns from hypochlorite. How does the water chemistry change, the reactivity change with temperature changes. Maybe through the year as operations change processes, how is that going to impact the pilot? So we really wanted to test the system through its kind of full life, if you will, anticipated conditions and see how it does. We aren't yet at the hottest part of the year, which would be July, August timeframe, so we want to see how that goes. But in terms of operational characteristics, Greg or Michael, do you guys want to?
Sounds like you want to watch it for at least a year, maybe longer.
From my perspective, I think a year would be useful. But
Greg, you want to?
Yeah, probably. A year will be, but we're still proceeding forward. Everything, all indicators are at this point.
So far, so good.
It's positive.
Yeah.
But you want to see a full season's worth
It
of
would be, that would
performance.
probably the best to be able to see it all the way through from the cooler. We know that it performed well during the winter months and in the spring, but we have had a lot cooler summer than than normal. See it get into the higher temperatures and just make sure it performs as well. Hopefully it does, if not even better. And then once we get closer to that, and year's date, I think we feel comfortable as the operations group to be able to say, without any other type of effluent changes, that we'd be comfortable moving forward with a full scale. Not that we haven't continued to look at a full scale project and lay it out and get costs and stuff like that.
So far, so good, but
Yeah.
you just want to keep an eye, you want to watch it longer, I guess.
Because we want to get rid of that gaseous quarry more than anybody, because it's been nice.
You're the ones that have to work around it, right?
I'd have to shave this one.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
Okay.
think it's been kind of unanimous on that front, that
Yeah.
pretty much everybody we talked to is relieved that chlorine is gone. So, we'd really like to make this a success. So far, we haven't had to try very hard to make it successful. It's been successful on its own.
Great. Thanks.
Good.
Crystal.
It's good afternoon now. So just a couple high-level points. Two of our people went to the GFOA conference in Portland, Michelle and Celeste. In the finance side, Michelle is still working with the Public Trust Advisory regarding getting the Cal Classic. We're ready to go. We just needed to wait for Richard to get back since he's our investment policy person to sign. So we'll get that taken care of this week, and the plan is to, get forward and move forward on that one. And then I wanted to take a minute. I'm just jumping around, so I wanted to take a minute to thank Kaylee. This is the second time that she's had a crash course in another position that she's had to cover for a length of time, and I think she's doing very well while she's still maintaining her normal position. So thank you for always jumping in. And then on the other thing that I wanted to say is, I didn't say this during the budget meeting, but it really truly was a full agency support. We had several meetings with the department managers and the supervisors and the finance committee, and I especially wanted to thank Michelle and Dawn and Celeste for their part in the salaries, wages, benefits, revenue, and payroll side. That's it for me.
Thanks. General Manager's report. Mike.
It is now good afternoon,
Yeah.
Board of Directors and
Sorry about that.
President Wilkins. That's okay. For the General Manager's report for last month, management and staff continue to work with consultant for the connection fee study. We continue to implementation of new software programs with maintenance, lab, and operations. Management staff continue to work CIP projects, and then the land exchange with TTAD, which are task updates. For the past month, HDR consultant working with selected staff and leaderships to skill building, overall work, group team building. Continue monitoring the sodium hypochlorite system. And management staff worked on the upcoming budget finalization. And thank you to Crystal and her team. We did a summer kickoff barbecue. Pictures, please. We just barbecued up some burgers and dogs for everybody. Everybody pitched in and brought stuff in, and we had a nice little summer kickoff. It wasn't really quite summer yet, but we did it anyway, hoping that summer would come. And then also staff participated in the Truckee Day cleanup along Drauger Drive. We did actually Butterfield and Drauger, almost all the way up to the bus barn. So staff went out and cleaned up, and we got a few bags of stuff. And I want to thank everybody who participated in that.
Where did all that come from?
That was from around the airport, because the airport district pitched in, the town of Truckee pitched in, that area up there, the big snow pile where they shoot all the snow over there. They cleaned up in that area as the snow was melting, even though there was still snow there. There was a lot of garbage there. And I think Rupert Inc. had already done a couple of cleanups, so that is definitely a pretty messy area with that snow. It's got a lot of garbage in it, but they went and cleaned that area up. And then we picked it all up along Jogger Drive. It seems like a lot of stuff ends up getting thrown out of cars and stuff along that road. So other than that, I have nothing else for the
Great. Thanks, Mike.
questions.
Any questions or comments for Mike? And there's no one here for public comment. Is that bear on property?
No, it's just cute.
Just a picture from somewhere?
It's outside right now.
Okay. Now we're at Board of Directors comment. Any comments from board members?
Yeah, I got a couple of comments. This has been a good meeting because I've had a lot, not so much anxiety, you guys, but I've had pressure from my board of directors and the constituents in Squaw Valley about what we're talking about with our surplus property and how strong a lot of the people over there in Squaw feel about what we have here and how safe our operation has been. And they really don't want to do anything that would compromise our safety and our ability to provide service into the future and keeping the public safe. That was the first thing. So I think the direction that we're headed with this assessment with our liability, I think we're on the right track. I think that that taking a cautious approach to what we're doing here is the right thing, because Blake, you mentioned about the anxiety of people wanting to move forward in a quick manner. We've got to inform, at least from my perspective, the people in Squaw Valley. We've got to educate them on what's going on here, because this is a very, very important issue that has everybody's antennas up. And we've got to do the right thing and make sure that we do everything necessary to educate them on what the plan is. And Andrew, your presentation was spot on. I just have to commend you on your homework and what you've done, because you're right spot on. It's very important information for not only the airport district, if that's who these people were, but it's just very important information for the public to know where we are as an agency. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
And you being a historian about Polaris is pretty surprising to me.
Yeah, how did you come across that information, Blake?
When we put in the Glenshire sewer line that crosses the railroad tracks and comes across the river, I guess there was a report in the at-grade crossing on the railroad tracks are currently possibly being pulled out. We're trying to stop them from doing that because we need access. But as we pulled the file to see if we had actual easement rights across railroad tracks, we came across this historical report of Polaris. So I'll share more on the sidebar over a beer or something.
Okay.
Some good stuff.
Yeah. Anything else?
Well, two things. One, Richard, welcome back. I don't know that we've officially said that. Really good to see you. Fantastic. Two, this is really a non-priority item, but I just want to bring it up. Something I've been curious about, and I've had several folks that I know that know where I work and what I'm involved in have brought up, and it has to do with the growing field of wastewater epidemiology. A lot of treatment plants were testing for COVID, And apparently there's a range of different things now that you can pick up in wastewater that can give the community a heads up as to whether or not something's coming well before they end up in the hospital and possible public health things. And so I'm just, with the rest of the board's consent, I would say, I'd be interested in having staff kind of investigate that. You might want to talk with, Harry Weiss with the hospital district or the county health officers to see if they're interested in seeing TTSA be involved in that. I think it's not a lab load that falls on us. I think the places that do it, we collect the samples, but it gets shipped off. Stanford was a big leader in that. But I'd be curious to see if, there's a community interest in TTSA participating in that as well. And the value it could potentially provide to our community, and I think there's other folks out there that you see the articles in the New York Times and other places about this. Whether we should be participating in that as well.
Blake, is your thought that would be because I think that should be something that we're willing to participate in. I'm not sure about. It seems like it's more like a county health office or a local, some kind of health-oriented agency that would lead that and actually use the data, but we may kind of make the effluent available to help facilitate that effort. Is that
and I'm not sure how the different treatment plants around the country that are doing this, how they've instigated. So it's a real, first blush to look into, how other places are doing it, whether there's. And clearly nobody's approached us at this point. You'd think if there was an interest, we'd get approached by Nevada or Placer County Environmental Health or the hospital district,
right,
seeking our participation in it. But they've all got a lot of stuff on their plate. Maybe they've been intending to, but they just haven't done it. And so, I think it would be interesting to, in the fact that, maybe it should come from them, but we know it's happening at other treatment plants. I'm not opposed to us doing, not necessarily offering we're ready to do it, but just figure out what's involved in it and whether there is interest, in value. Because I think that field is really evolving, and seems like there's some value to our community, and I don't know what would be involved from, and I don't want to spend a bunch of staff time necessarily doing it either. So I just.
You think it'd be like an inquiry to the health offices of the 3 counties that we collect effluent from to see if it's something they're interested in pursuing further? Okay, and the reason I ask is I agree I think it's something that TTSA should be willing to help facilitate. I wouldn't want to see us getting too far out into the public health arena, right, in terms of.
Look, the little bit that I've read about it is that the health department would come to us and ask for that.
The health department is.
Yeah.
So a first step could be to reach out to the county health departments and see if they have an interest in it. If they don't, do we want to put much more time and effort into it?
No, I would like to hear back that that's the case. We could.
Right.
I know that TSD was approached by, I forget what the name of the entity was that was doing COVID testing to see if we wanted to participate. I think that was a third party maybe that was developing the lab work, and maybe it was a business opportunity for them. It wasn't the public health community coming forward, but just, and you might talk to some of the, I think it's probably not hard to find what other treatment plants are now involved in this and talk to some of your peers. How did they get involved in it? Maybe before you talk to the public health officials, because they may say yes right away, and you might find out from your peers that, in fact, this is a can of worms we've just gotten into. And so I'm just curious, because I've been wondering about it, and I've had several of my friends and associates say, is TTSA doing this? Should we be doing this? Mm-hmm. And so it'd be good to give them a better answer than no. Nobody's asked, so we're not doing it. It'd be nice to do a little bit of work. So not a high priority item, not asking for something to be on the agenda next month, but as time allows to explore the opportunity and need for being involved in some of this wastewater epidemiology work.
Okay. I'll talk, Michael and I can talk to Jason, and he can reach out to some of his peers and see if any of them are participating or have been approached. I know we were approached by California Department of Health, and we responded saying, yeah, we're willing. And during COVID, we never heard back from them.
Okay.
So.
All right. Anything else under director's comments?
Yeah, I have one.
Yeah, Dave.
Question about, read about the hack into the California pension system. Are we involved in all that?
So I
Any
think
information on that?
was that like a like a cyber attack where someone got into the database you're referring to?
Yeah, as I understand it, they got into California pension system and got a whole bunch of Social Security numbers and so forth.
Crystal, do you know if that's...
I haven't heard anything. This is the first I've heard of it, so as far as I know, as of this moment in time, our banks are fine.
Yeah. Sounds like we're not involved in it yet, Dave.
Okay.
I have a little background on this. It was a third-party transfer service, and the reason everybody knows about it is because they notified the companies they were working with of the hack. So if we didn't receive the notification, it's probably not a service we use.
Did you hear that, Dave?
Yes.
Okay.
I've got three things. First, Kaylee, thank you very much for your great job going in for Rochelle. Really appreciate it. The second thing is, 2 weeks ago, I had never walked the perimeter or walked around, and my wife and I came out and walked, and it's a pretty remarkable piece of property. I mean, it's really remarkable. But what I took a couple pictures is people living the van life seem to like this area. There were three different vans that were parked, and I took pictures of them, and I talked to one guy, and he was like, oh, I was just here overnight. Like, well, you can't. The sign's right there. And that was actually one of the first things, my first board meeting, I think, Dale, you brought up, was that people are taking advantage of it. Mm-hmm. And then the third thing is the work that JAU did with the overlay of the maps, I think, was a great visual for me to understand the property.
Thank you.
The second thing is, I believe that we have the awareness that this is a bigger region and there are a lot of different agencies involved in it. And I think the conversations that we've had about the legal and how we should move forward, I think we've come a long way, from when I first came on the board. And I think we're in a good position now to take the right steps at the right pace to be able to make an informed decision. But I don't think we're in a hurry to do it by any means. I think we want to do it right.
So just a data point. So in my role at the town about 15 years ago, we decided we needed a new location for our maintenance facilities for our public works operation. We ended up buying land from the Forest Service to do that, and it was that Forest Service land had the same zoning designation that our property here has. And this was like 14 years ago. We paid $200,000 an acre for that land. So that's where my head's at, is if we've got property that's far enough away from our operation that we can be comfortable surplusing it, we can turn that into cash money to fund capital, and that if that also helps other public agencies, that seems like that's kind of where my head's at, is if those pieces come together, it can make sense. But I know that TTSA gave the school district a really good deal on the lease way back when, and I think that was out of the TTSA board at the time recognizing the value of the school district and the mission that it accomplishes. I think all the public agencies have important missions, but I'm not looking at sweetheart deals in terms of anything we do here.
I got a comment, Dan.
Yeah, it's,
I've already had my director's comment, but seeing as how you brought this up.
yeah, you can come back to it.
The bus barn is a very, very unique situation because the Tahoe Truckee Unified School District has its cone of influence from Four Ring Road, the top of Serene Lakes, North Star. I mean, this whole region
Same constituents.
has a zone of influence that's a benefit. When you start talking about surplusing land to other agencies that don't have a zone of benefit for other member agencies, you might be treading on some very controversial, issues. Because what's done with our property here at TTSA will not benefit Olympic Valley that I can see in any way, shape, or form. And the constituents of Olympic Valley are taxpayers, are shareholders of this real estate. And when you address a situation like we just had today, where the town of Truckee is going to be the sole beneficiary of the positive things that could happen by surplusing our real estate, you have to understand that it's got to be fair to all concerned for the member districts. And for Tahoe City, Squaw, Alpine, I'm not speaking for you, Dave, but this is just my thought process. There might be some pushback from the member agencies that are not in that zone of benefit.
Right, and that's why I think fair market value is so critical here. Because we can't be giving land away.
Fair market value, once it's gone, it's gone.
Right.
This leased land, it would be an ongoing benefit to TTSA and to all the customers in perpetuity. So that's more my thinking.
Yeah, there's like 28,000 shareholders here, and everybody's going to want to make sure that it's fair.
Absolutely.
And so that's the one consideration that we have to have as board members, that we're treating all of our shareholders equal. And if anybody thinks that they're getting the smelly end of the stick, there's going to be public outcry.
I was going to bring up one other thing. We had 4 board members and the GM for the airport district here. They made no comment, which I thought was interesting.
Yeah.
But then I was talking to one of the board members afterwards, and apparently the land swap is on their agenda for tomorrow. And that board member indicated they were going to vote to delay execution of the agreement. And I'm just wondering whether anybody was planning on attending it. I know that Dan, you and Mike went to a airport board meeting not long ago. Just to, I have a feeling maybe they were here because they thought we were going to talk about in more detail about that land swap. And I wondered whether Richard, you were aware of that and intended to attend, or delegated somebody, or whether Dan, you've been to their board meetings before, whether someone wants to go and just be the eyes and ears and have them make their decision with somebody from the other party.
Reiterate that we're ready to move
Present.
forward.
Yeah, I just talked to Rob since
Yes.
he's here and was planning on attending.
Okay, all right, thanks. I think it's
They're
great.
planning on
Potential.
agreeing to ink.
They're taking it to their board at their board meeting, so we'll see.
For consideration and possible action.
Well, why would they want to delay something that we've been working at this for a very long time? And we all seem to have had a consensus 6 months ago, and
We signed a contract 3 years ago that kind of inked the deal, and it sounds like they're getting cold feet.
Richard will report back to us if they don't, why they chose not to. Okay, good, thanks. I just was curious.
So I'm happy
Thanks for
Richard
tracking
wants
that.
to cover that. I could
I'm leaving on vacation tomorrow, so.
Right. Do you guys-
Again?
That's what retirement's about, brother.
Do you guys want me to go as well, or just rely on Richard?
I would be fine if you went. I'm not going to direct you to go if it works in your schedule, and I think.
Okay. I mean, I think if I went, I would just make comments to the effect that we're prepared to stand by the agreement that we all signed 3 years ago, and that we.
Well, I just, not to enter into this whole discussion, and I want to go home too, but why would they want to delay this?
I believe that some of their board members want to retain that property out there with the opportunity to make it available for some of the relocation of the West River Street industrial. And if it goes to us, we may be less likely to make that happen. And so that's I believe that's the underlying reason, rationale.
Now, this is from the new board that had just taken seat.
Elections happen in a while,
last
though, I
couple
think
of
it's-
years.
Yeah.
Some new board members, some
Yeah.
previous. So.
Okay, well, good. I'm glad
We're good.
there's
We're good.
going to be a TTSA presence there.
Okay.
Thanks.
If you want to give me a ring, Richard.
Okay.
Like I said, I would just reiterate our support for following through with the agreement we've already executed. Okay. That's it for board member reports. I believe we are adjourned.
I so moved.
Thank you.